I want you to understand this is an extreme amount of drama, but I strongly believe that you have to do what's right for you.
This is the pyramid I gave so much power to over the years, and it's also where I found myself at the bottom. The world has watched my life unfold on their screens, but there's so much more that was left on the cutting room floor. It's finally time I share what really happened, what you didn't see on TV, and how I lost control of the narrative shared to millions. It's now my turn to tell the story.
Yeah.
I am for the whole team, not just for Maddie. They call me and they want Maddie. They don't want Nia.
Thus far, this LA trip has been challenging, and Abby has not been a good manager for Nia.
Repeatedly been told you belong at the bottom. How do you find your way to the top?
Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Jordan Sparks, and in today's video we are going to be talking about Nia's book, Bottom of the Pyramid. So if you're interested in that, make sure to stick around, give this video a thumbs up, and let's hop right into it. Bottom of the Pyramid, a memoir of persevering, dancing for myself, and starring in my own life. All right, so it starts off, they say sometimes your family isn't the one you're born into, but rather the one you make for yourself. This is by Chloe Lucasiak, by the way. It's safe to say that the original cast and crew of Dance Moms was like one big, albeit highly dysfunctional family. For 4 long years, all we knew was each other. But the moment couldn't last forever, so one by one, the original cast slowly withdrew until the remaining picture was mostly unrecognizable. Save, of course, for Nia. I always admired the fact that she stayed until the very end of the show. She wanted to finish what we had started, and if any of us was going to outlast the chaos of a reality show, I knew it would be her. For the first few years after we all began to go our own ways, we mostly avoided each other. Speaking for myself, I needed space to heal and process everything that I had gone through. But eventually we began to find our way back to each other. Nia and I would end up in the same city at the same time and decide to quickly catch up or meet for dinner. Sometimes it was hard. Just being together could jog memories of our most challenging days, but time soothed our wounds, as it often does, and we were left with an unbreakable connection. Nia is truly one of my dearest friends, and we understand each other in a way that is rare. There's a sisterhood between all of us girls. We can go an entire year without speaking to or seeing each other, but the moment we're together again, time stands still. Just as we took time to return to each other, we all needed time to figure out how we wanted to tell our stories. Some of us choose to share frequently, others choose not to share at all. While we were there with each other, living the same days, we each had our own experiences. When I had learned that Nia had decided not to do the reunion in 2024, I was rather surprised. But when she explained that she wanted to share her past in her own time, in her own way, I understood. I'll never fully appreciate her personal experience on the show and vice versa, but this book, Bottom of the Pyramid, is her opportunity to reclaim her story, to retell the past in her own truth, and show you all that she is who she is today through choices, not happenstance. I'll admit that reading this book was difficult at times. It reminded me of things I had long since buried or forgotten entirely. My heart broke again for the younger versions of us who endured so much. But as Nia reminds us through her story, our hardships empower us to rise. We cannot always control our circumstances, but we can control our grit. We can face each day with grace and strength, just as she demonstrates. If you were my own blood, I couldn't be prouder of you, Nia. Chloe Lucasiak. All right, you guys, well, that was the foreword by Chloe. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on that. And let's get into the introduction, Bottom of the Pyramid. When the producers of Dance Moms contacted me about participating in a reunion show during the spring of 2023, my immediate answer was no. I didn't even have to think about it. If I was going to share anything about my time on the show, it would be on my terms and my terms only. I had already started working on a book, and though I considered the reunion could have been a great way to announce and promote my memoir, just the thought of being among many of my former castmates made me sick with anxiety. I didn't trust them or some of the producers. Production had 7 years to turn my narrative around and failed to do so. This was my time to put my foot down and show them they didn't own or control me. When I first finished filming Dance Moms, I wanted to write about my experience on the show. A few of the girls had already published books, so I felt the need to share my side of the story. I'm so happy I ended up waiting. I was young and angry, and I know that I would have said things I'd regret. Time away from the show allowed me to reflect and gather my thoughts, but the desire to share my story never wavered. And after a few years, I began to wonder whether it was finally the right time. I had just started meeting with my book agent about figuring out the process when one of my closest friends, former Dance Moms co-star Chloe Lukasiak, and I got together to hang out. We started talking about our time on the show, and Chloe expressed surprise that I hadn't yet shared my experience more outwardly. I told her I'd been scared of Abby for the longest time, and was also afraid of the backlash I might receive from former castmates and the network. "You should talk about it," said Chloe confidently. "People will want to hear from you." She floated the idea of sharing a video on YouTube to address everything, but I always knew my story needed more space to be told. It had to be a book. A year and a half later, I shared with Chloe that while I wasn't doing the reunion show, I was writing my story. She was so excited for me, and I never regretted my decision not to attend. If anything, hearing some of the negative comments after the episode aired justified my concerns about participating. Moreover, I didn't want to allow others to railroad my story into the direction they saw fit. Everything was aligning, and I knew now was the time for my voice, my perspective, to take center stage. When I told my parents I was ready to write my book, the first question they asked was what the title would be. "Bottom of the Pyramid," I said. They understood how deep that title was for me, which was exactly why my dad worried about it. He knew I had to put so much work into getting people to see me as not always being at the bottom. But to me, the title wasn't something negative. I was reclaiming it and turning it into a positive. After all, it's a testament to a large portion of my life. From the age of 3 until well into my teenage years, I was a member of the Abby Lee Dance Company, ALDC, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Many assume I joined the studio for the show, but I was there for many years prior to the studio landing a TV deal with Lifetime in 2011. The ensuing hit Dance Moms would go on to air in more than 130 countries and be translated into 10 different languages. The breadth and depth of the show's success was unimaginable. What started out as a 6-week run and then 7 added episodes over the summer became a pop culture phenomenon overnight, and we girls were suddenly household names. I remember the first time we all saw ourselves on a big screen at our premiere party in Las Vegas. It was simultaneously exciting and weird, and it never got old, nor did the opportunities that followed, like winning a Kids' Choice Award or performing on The View or being nominated for several Teen Choice Awards. Each time felt refreshing and different, and we were grateful for our incredible fandom, which has overall proven to be supportive and loving. However, there are some who can be cruel and hurtful. It was hard reading comments that I should not have been on the team and that I was a bad dancer. Sometimes people would even quote Abby's negativity, taking her awful words as gospel. Luckily, over time, I found mentors and a dance support system who saw value in my talents. They believed in me and lifted me up despite the negativity that brewed online. Viewers' perception of me stemmed from me always being on the bottom of the pyramid. This pyramid was a tiered system that showed how my castmates and I ranked each week in the eyes of the founder, Abby Lee Miller, based on our dance capabilities. She would literally arrange our headshots into a pyramid shape on the mirrors in the dance studio, covering up the images so she could reveal them one by one, bottom to the top, while she criticized or praised how we had performed that week. Being at the top of the pyramid was the goal. It meant you'd done something good and had her favor. The bottom was the last place anyone wanted to be. If you were on the bottom, you'd messed up, underperformed, or otherwise found yourself out of her good graces. And the bottom was where I found myself week after week, season after season, no matter how hard I worked. I did not want to be known as the bad dancer. My mom and I were particularly sensitive to this because people sometimes unfairly and incorrectly assume standards get lowered for Black people. I knew I had to get better to prove that I was more than the image that had been painted of me. After years of being the underdog, constantly told I was a terrible dancer or that I wouldn't amount to anything or that I was stupid or ugly, I often wonder how I came out whole, especially because for the majority of the time on the show, I was the only Black girl. People tried to break me, but I never let them win. If it wasn't for my determination and the support of my amazing family, I don't know how I would have made it through. Sadly, my story is not that uncommon. There are a lot of Black women who have been told they could not do something and that they should settle or forget their dreams. In my case, I feel like I was set up to fail. I was given choreography that was too juvenile for my age group and ability level. The songs I danced to and the costumes I wore were sometimes overtly racist, immature, or inappropriate. I was pitted against a few Black dancers who joined the team and criticized for my skin tone, the curves of my body, and even the natural hair that grew out of my scalp. I know fans wonder why I stayed on the show for so long. The short of it is that I would not concede to anyone's opinion of me. The fact that I knew I wasn't wanted on the team only made me push harder. I needed to prove I am good enough, that I would stick to my commitments and come out stronger, no matter what. I was treated as if I had less to offer, but I knew myself. I was a performer. Even if the playing field wasn't level, I wasn't going to stop. Watch me, I'd think. I'm not going anywhere. Abby made it seem as if being at the bottom was the absolute worst position, and some of my castmates leaned into that notion and treated me poorly because of it. But years later, I've come to think of this differently. Consider a cheerleading squad. When they form a pyramid, what does the bottom look like? The bottom has all the strongest members of the squad who are there to ensure the team members do not fall. Without the bottom of the pyramid, there would be no one at the top. The pyramid wouldn't even exist. I know now that I was the glue to the team, using my strength to hold everyone together, even when no one could see it. When is Nia's birthday? I'm wondering if she's an Aquarius. I've never looked into it, but that last paragraph was giving Aquarius energy. I'm an Aquarius. Anyways, let's get back into it. So, I've always known one important reality. When you're at the bottom, the only place you can go is up. Being at the bottom of the pyramid is the beginning of my story, but it most certainly is not the end. Despite barriers and constant naysayers, assumptions, and criticisms, I've found within me the power to create my own narrative. I have developed a tough skin and the stamina to prove others wrong and myself right. Some may criticize me for what I have to say, or even for speaking up at all. But I've come into a place where I don't let the negativity of people I don't respect bother me. I simply don't listen to the voices of those who have harmed me. Because of where my story began, my foundation is strong, and I am grounded in resilience. Because of where my story began, I can offer it up as encouragement to others. I'm not interested in participating in the Oppression Olympics or competing with others over who had the most difficult time on Dance Moms. My story is one of hardships, yes, but it's also one of strength, perseverance, triumph, and defining success for myself. The little girl at the bottom of the pyramid grew up into a young woman, and though the journey was challenging, I hope you will find it to be equally inspiring. Finally, I'm ready to be the star in my own life. Be a star in your own life. Alright, you guys, well, I'm so far finding it super compelling reading Nia's book. I loved Chloe's foreword. I thought that that was really charming that she had Chloe do the foreword for the book. I thought that was very sweet, and so far I'm enjoying it. Chapter 1, It Takes a Village. Prior to Dance Moms, I had a pretty typical childhood. I lived with my parents and brothers in Churchill, the kind of cute, small Pittsburgh suburb where kids played in the street and people waved as they passed by jogging or walking their dogs. Our next door neighbors were the best. We would have campfires and make s'mores in their backyard or play together with our dogs and take them on walks. We'd ride bikes, go to the local swimming pool, play house, and hang out in our hot tub. Whenever we were out of town, they would collect our mail and check on the house. Some of my fondest memories are from summer vacations with my family. On Myrtle Beach, where my parents had a timeshare, we spent hours walking along the shore, the sun shining bright on our skin and sand between our toes, while my mom made sloppy joes or tacos in the property's small kitchen, located just off the living room and 2 bedrooms. Our mornings were spent at the pool or the lazy river, while afternoons at the beach included sandcastle building and shell collecting. Sometimes we'd go mini-golfing or to medieval times, and on rainy days, we'd sit inside and play board games or watch TV shows like Drake and Josh or SpongeBob SquarePants. Taking that trip was something we looked forward to each year. It was a time when everybody was happy and carefree, our only focus on enjoying our family. My mom and dad, Holly and Evan Fraser, always treated me like a princess. Maybe because I'm the only girl of my parents' 3 children, sandwiched between Evan Jr., EJ, who is 2 years older than me, and William, Will, who is 2 years my junior. My little brother Will and I were the closest growing up. Best friends, really. And similar in many ways. When we were kids, people often mistook us for twins, and you'd never find one of us without the other. We baked together, made pillow forts in the living room, played outside with the neighbors, and shared movie nights. Sometimes I would teach him tumbling in our living room, which got super dangerous in the small space. EJ, on the other hand, was typically off doing his own thing or playing sports. I've always looked up to him, though, because he's such a cool guy, charming with a genuine heart. While I was a bit of a wallflower, he was the popular kid at school, and I was in constant awe of his ability to draw people in and make everyone smile. He has the best sense of humor. I like to think some of that rubbed off on me, too. Our tight-knit family valued customs like eating meals together in our cozy living room, helping my mom cook in the kitchen, walking our dogs, and playing board games, especially chess. The support we've always shown one another has strongly influenced the person I am today. In the early years of my life, my mother was the principal of our elementary and middle school, and my father was the CEO and executive director of a nonprofit social services agency called the Hill House Association. He worked closely with the residents of the Hill District in Pittsburgh to ensure they received resources vital to the community, including childcare, after-school care, dental care, health services, economic development, continuing education, and job-seeking assistance. One of his big initiatives was getting the Hill District a local grocery store. Part of the reason why I have a heart for philanthropy and want to give back in any way I can is because of my father's dedication to community service. Eventually, my dad would go on to start his own nonprofit focused on helping Black people get executive-level leadership roles. He noticed there was a big financial gap when it came to people of color in high-paying jobs and decided to do something about it. I hope to one day start a nonprofit of my own, just like he did. With both my parents in demanding jobs, it took a village to raise us. Although my mom's parents, Gwen and William Hatcher, still lived in New York, where they raised my mom, they stepped in to help with tasks like babysitting, taking us to doctor's appointments, and cooking our meals. They were there whenever our family needed them. They even provided financial assistance whenever they could, like helping out with the cost of dance or buying my brother's team uniforms. They attended any sporting events or dance competitions we were a part of whenever they could. Some summers when I stayed with them in the city, Grandpa Hatcher would drive me to dance intensives there. One summer I attended the dance theater or Harlem's dance intensive, and we fell into a morning routine. He'd cook me breakfast and we'd leave later than planned. But Granddad would drive fast and switch lanes and honk his horn in typical New York fashion, and somehow he always got me there on time. Likewise, my father's parents, Brenda and Andrew Fraser, helped shuttle my brothers and me to various extracurriculars. My parents introduced us to a plethora of activities at a young age: sports, karate, art, piano lessons, swimming, drum lessons, cheerleading, you name it, we tried it. The variety of opportunities we were exposed to allowed us to decide for ourselves where our individual interests lay. My mom first put me in dance classes because she had danced recreationally when she was a child and thought dance was a fun activity for little girls. She had been taught by Vicki Shear, a revered dance teacher who served the dance community for more than 75 years before her death in 2019, and whose dance competitions I would later compete in with the ALDC. So I wasn't the first dancer in my family, and for that matter, neither was my mom, who not only was trained by Vicki Shear, but also took African dance in college. When my granddad started taking me to dance, he told me all about his brother, Henry Belcher, who was in his 90s and still tap danced professionally. He was part of a group called the Dancin' Demons, and they had performed on all sorts of stages, including at the famed Apollo Theater. The family connection made my love of dance even more exciting for Grandpa Fraser. He picked me up from school and dropped me off at dance for years until he literally couldn't drive anymore. I absolutely love this. I always wondered if Nia's history of dance, if anything, brought her back to the old classic tap dancing of America, where tap dancing got started. And it sounds like she absolutely 100% has roots in that. So Henry Belcher danced into his 90s, that is crazy, and tap dancing professionally into your 90s. But that is so cool. I love that little tidbit. Anyways, let's get back into it. Granddad Fraser was sweet, funny, and laid back, while Grandma Fraser, although loving, was sterner. I guess she had to be, since she was active in the civil rights movement. She did a lot of advocacy work and protested against the KKK in Pittsburgh. She was the first Black president of the Pittsburgh East End chapter of NOW, National Organization of Women, and even maintained a position in the county council. Earlier in life, she'd had a host of jobs in real estate and education. Wow, it sounds like Nia comes from a very strong family with really strong values on both sides. Coming from a family of strong Black women, I see where I get my tenacity. My grandma on my mom's side, whom we call Nana, is a retired lawyer and equally brilliant. I can count on her for great advice about anything. She always knows what to say, especially when things get hard. Working in the Bronx DA's office gave her a plethora of wild stories that she uses to share life lessons. Although not a grandparent, my Aunt Heather, my mom's sister, played a vital role in my upbringing as well. She is extremely smart and accomplished. She is also a lawyer like Nana and is a huge adventurer who helped instill my love of travel. It is not lost on me how blessed my siblings and I are to have known and grown up with our maternal and paternal grandparents. We are a family tied together not only by blood, but by love. I'm forever thankful for their presence in my life and all the care they gave, especially when things got tough. Since my dad often hosted community events, my family saw early on how much I loved the stage. I was always drawn to it, and although shy, I'm a bit of a drama queen. Anytime my dad was called on stage to give a speech or a toast or to introduce himself, I was right there by his side. As soon as the mic touched his fingers and he started speaking, I was reaching out to take it into my own hands. Even then, I knew I wanted to be a performer. My first dance studio was far from our house, but it was our only option because it was the only one we knew of that accepted 2-year-olds. Once a week for a year, my mom would drive about an hour away to Indianola, Pennsylvania, where I would attend class. After that year, she knew she couldn't sustain the commute, working, picking up my brothers and me from school, and then rushing to get me to dance on time was just too much. So she had to find a place closer to home. She was surprised to learn that there was a dance studio right up the street from us, Rain Dance Productions, that offered classes to students my age. This was a perfect solution, a dance studio that I could attend in my neighborhood. The decision was based solely on convenience and not on any desire for prestige or a professional career in dance. My parents soon learned, however, that the establishment was co-owned by Marion Lorraine Miller and her daughter Abby Lee Miller, and Abby had credentials. Her students had gone to Broadway and danced for Disney, and she was well known in the Pittsburgh dance community. She was also certified by Dance Masters of America and was a member of the Dance Masters of Pennsylvania. You wouldn't have known any of this from driving past the studio. Although close to our home, Rain Dance Productions was literally in the middle of nowhere. Just beyond the front door was a grandiose, semicircular, gray wooden structure of a desk that took up most of the space in the entryway, and to the right of it, a collage of photos of working dancers set to the tone for the rest of the space. The studio was generously sized and consisted of 3 rooms. The upstairs viewing area overlooked all the dance rooms and offered parents a place to sit and watch their children practice. Studio A, the largest room, was the nicest, boasting marley flooring atop a raised platform which helped take some of the pressure off dancers' legs and feet. Most of our classes were held in this room. Studio B was essentially an overflow room. Though it was smaller than Studio A, it also had marley flooring. When it wasn't being used by the younger kids for classes, the older kids would use it for more concentrated classes like ballet. At one point, we even had silk aerial classes in there. Studio C, the smallest room, had hardwood floors that weren't good for much of anything besides tap. There was a den in the studio as well, which had a weird smell and often housed pests like ants and stink bugs. Even though the den was kind of crusty, we all loved it. It was our hangout spot, a comfortable room for us dancers to talk, stretch, do homework, eat dinner and snacks, and do our hair. Looking back, I can see how bad some of the conditions in the studio were, but it was just normal to me. This was my dance home, and I aspired to join the wall of working dancers someday. The school had 2 dance tracks, recreational and competition. Recreational dancers would perform with their classes in just one recital at the end of the dance year. There were no solos, no duets, no trios, and classes were held only one day a week. Competition dancers, on the other hand, while often performing in groups, could have a solo if Abby allowed it. The dance year ran almost the same schedule as the school year, starting in the fall and ending in June. Recreational dance was a hobby. But to be a competition or company dancer, that was serious business. Initially, my mom signed me up for recreational dance, since she was familiar with it and it came with fewer obligations. But I really wanted a solo, so I had to become part of the company. Company dancers received better classes, better costumes, better choreography, and more attention from the teachers at the studio. If you were chosen as a soloist, you also received affirmation that you had talent. Being part of the competition team represented the epitome of an elite dance experience. Often, I would watch the older girls in the company, and I looked up to them. They were beautiful dancers, and I was mesmerized by their routines. One dancer in particular who caught my attention was Brooke Highland, who had also become a cast member of Dance Moms. Her solos were something to behold, and she seemingly won every title at every competition. Back then, my highest goal was to do the same, to get a crown. If I did that, I'd be the winner for an entire year, just like a reigning beauty pageant queen. But to get my crown, I had to be the best, which meant a lot of practice. I'm learning a lot about Nia's backstory that I had no clue about and have never even had an inkling of before. So that part I'm enjoying the most, I would say. But let me know your thoughts so far reading Nia's book down below. From my earliest memory, I was always frightened of Abby Lee Miller. Imagine being a little kid and walking into the studio. Abby is sitting at the front desk, filling the space with her tremendous presence. She is not what most people would envision when they think of a dance teacher. In fact, you've rarely ever seen Abby dance, just choreograph and teach. She is loud, big, and usually draped in black. She's intimidating, scary, and likes to yell. You'd hope Abby wouldn't be there, especially if you were late. Then she would tell you not to even bother going into class. You know what? I do not blame Nia at all. From the minute I saw one scene from Dance Moms, I was like, wow, that is one frightening woman that I would not want to be my teacher. But at the same point, there was like also something in me that was like, I could learn a thing or two from this woman. I just wouldn't deal with like being such a mean teacher. I don't do well under that kind of pressure. If she is there, you quickly try to go to the den without being noticed because you know that being noticed is an opportunity for her to find a fault in you. If you wear an extra layer of clothing, she will yell at you. If you wear socks, she will yell at you. If you have a hair tie on your wrist, she will yell at you. You quickly learn that you do not want to be on her bad side. I wasn't the only girl who was scared of Abby. We dancers would commiserate about our mutual fear. We would keep an ear out for her voice, and if we heard her coming, we'd scurry into another room before she found us. She was like a real, live Miss Trunchbull from Matilda. Even today, just the thought of her voice still sometimes freezes me in my tracks. Rather than send us flying out the door, however, her being hard on us had the opposite effect, bringing us together. We saw her harshness as a form of tough love and became a tight-knit group because of it. I could see how that would be different when you're a kid. You just like think that this is totally normal because you're like, well, everybody else is dealing with the same thing. And so everybody else is honestly trauma bonding. That's kind of what's happening amongst these kids here at the studio. Abby's focus was acrobatics, technique, and flexibility, so she tended to work a lot with the older girls. When I started as a recreational student, Mrs. Miller taught most of my classes: tap, ballet, and acrobatics. Each class was between 30 minutes to an hour. Abby's mother was so nice and had a style of teaching that was entirely different from Abby's. She was kind, gentle, and patient, even if we didn't get the moves right. Although I didn't work with Abby as much in the beginning, I knew she was always watching. By the time I turned 6, I convinced my mom to let me join the competition team. All we had to do was pay the dues and I was in, determined from the outset to earn that coveted solo. It would be difficult, but I'd seen Abby grant other 6- and 7-year-olds the honor. Besides, growing up with 2 brothers had given me a healthy dose of competitiveness. I wasn't afraid of a challenge. This was my time to shine. Well, you guys, it's great to hear that at least Nia's formal years and her first years of training were done by somebody that was nice and sweet and caring and nurturing, as they should be, which was Mrs. Miller, Abby Lee Miller's mom, Marion Lorraine. And I feel like these early formative years also set a precedent to be like, okay, this is how I should be treated as a student versus this. So at least Nia had a good head on her shoulders and wasn't too much of a victim to Abby's gaslighting and her narcissism because of that. But I'm glad that she at least had those good years with Marion Lorraine. What are your thoughts? Are you terrified of Abby Lee Miller? Would you be frightened of Abby Lee Miller? Let me know down in the comments below. I actually met Abby Lee Miller as an adult. I ran into her and Maddie and Kendall and Peyton at the mall in Toronto, just completely randomly. They were in town teaching a legs and feet workshop. And Abby Lee Miller is definitely intimidating in person. She was not teaching a class when I met her, and I feel like she goes into a completely different mode. But she wasn't necessarily mean or frightening when I met her. She just was a little bit intimidating, a little bit scary, I guess. So this excerpt is from chapter 2, which is titled Competitive Edge. And it says, before I joined the competition team, I attended dance class only on Wednesdays. But now that I was part of the team, practice was after school 3 days a week. Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Being a part of this team will take over your life. Abby warned us, but my mom didn't really understand how that could happen until it did. And we all saw on the show how it definitely did end up taking over their lives. But another excerpt from this chapter says, soon after I joined the competition team, the dance school was renamed the Abby Lee Dance Company. Training was a fundamental aspect of life at the ALDC. And I do mean life at the studio, because it felt like we lived there. I took classes in ballet, tap, and acro, plus technique-focused classes like jumps and turns, legs and feet, and warm-up. We also had classes just for combos. In the combination classes, we'd learn a minute or so of choreography in various styles like jazz, contemporary, musical theater, or lyrical, and then break it into groups and perform that section. The combination classes were just for fun, a helpful way for us to improve our movements and pick up on choreography quickly. Now, for any of you that aren't familiar with studio classes, this is pretty standard. I didn't grow up in a studio setting, but I did take dance all throughout college, and then I taught in a dance studio. And as an adult, I take classes at a dance studio. But essentially, in a normal dance studio, you generally are going to be doing some warm-ups. If it's ballet, you're going to do some bar exercises and then across the floor and some center work. In a jazz class, you're going to be doing a warm-up, some across the floors, and then you're going to work on a piece of choreography at the end. Same with hip-hop, contemporary, lyrical. For pretty much all classes, you're going to do a warm-up, some across the floor exercises, and then work on a piece of choreography at the end. So that's pretty standard. When I was in college, we did mostly like these audition prep classes. That was the only thing that was different aside from regular classes, and they were structured the same way. Then in this segment, she kind of reveals some alarming choreography, I guess that you could call it, some terminology that Abby would use. So it says, thankfully, my signature step, the jackknife, wasn't difficult to spell. I'm pretty sure the name was made up, but the move was basically a straddle jump in the air. And I was really good at it. Abby incorporated it into nearly all of my routines, so Mom was always writing that move into her notes. Abby had a plethora of wild names for other moves too, though some we didn't like to say or write, like the floor pose that was similar to pigeon pose in yoga, which she called the swastika pose. Mom and I never laughed about that one. I was so little I didn't understand what the word even meant. Once I learned the context, I was horrified. Yeah, there's no reason for you to have to call it that. You can just call it a double stag pose. Or there's also no reason why you even need to intentionally make a pose to look like that. Like, just stick with a double stag and do some different arms. Another alarming part from this chapter reads, there was one true gift that she gave us girls each year. As a Christmas present, she would buy us matching bra and panty sets because, quote, every little girl should have underwear that matches. Now, I've talked about this on my YouTube channel before because I made a full documentary comparison between Abby Lee Miller and Dan Schneider that a lot of people either really agreed with or were really offended by. But Things like this were brought to light by Reagan, who was the one that was in, I believe it was the first episode, where, if you remember Sinister Minister Dawn, that was her mom. That whole blowout, Reagan, that was the daughter. Well, her and her mom made a video showing these undergarments that Abby had purchased them, and some of the kids on the team were as young as 7 years old, so that was disturbing, but that is what Nia is referencing here. It says, the younger girls like me got a training bra with matching panties. I didn't care that much about my own bra and underwear matching, but I did think it was cool that us girls matched one another. In my mind, it made us more like sisters. Yeah, a team jacket would probably suffice. Just my kooky opinion, but our dance sisterhood was one of the biggest appeals of the studio. Though I'd always liked school, I didn't have many friends. So despite the hard work, I looked forward to catching up with my dance mates and giggling about silly stuff. And yeah, that's what you could see with all of the girls, and it seemed to be their main motivation why they wanted to stay. Like Paige didn't want to leave her friends, Chloe didn't want to leave her friends. That's always what the underlying thing is. Like, yeah, they care about dance, but at the end of the day, they're like, I don't want to leave my friends. Like, these are my best friends. So, I don't know. I don't blame them. Nia then goes on to talk very sweetly about her friendship with Chloe Lukasiak and how they were best friends. But I wanted to take a moment to talk about the backstory behind Nia's solo, Natty of the Jungle, and this was her very first solo, which she talks about in this chapter. We already saw on the show all of the racial undertones that Abby presented, not just towards Nia, but towards every Black member of the dance team, or that came in to dance for an episode or two. But here we get a closer look. So let's take a look at this section. It says, I got the best news of my life. Nia, you'll be doing a solo. Abby said it so nonchalantly, but I was stoked. I'd been asking for one for a while, and my time had finally come. So Nia is finally getting her solo. I would be excited too. Keep in mind, this is her very first solo. This is her introduction to having a solo in the competitive world, and this is what she gets. My private session was set, and I couldn't wait to hear what song had been chosen for me. Other girls were getting popular, recognizable songs that were cute and age-appropriate, so I was sure I would love mine, but it turned out to be a song I'd never heard before. The selection was called Natty of the Jungle by Ken Longquist.
Jump in the club, I say it's getting late. Feeling my body heat right out the gate.
And it's about a child who is left in the wild to be raised by monkeys. Okay, so sort of like Tarzan. Wonder what Abby might be getting at here. The lyrics detail a girl who is unwashed with a dirty Tarzan-like appearance. She doesn't know how to eat from a fork and throws her banana peels on the ground. The song goes on to liken her to a gorilla before closing the chorus and a slew of monkey sounds. You guys, like, we can't even pretend for half a millisecond that that is not 100% intentional. Anybody with half of one individual brain cell would never be giving that solo to Nia. When Abby began teaching me the steps, I was genuinely excited. Tarzan had just come out a few years earlier, so I thought of this as my Tarzan dance. I loved Disney, loved animals, and thought the choppy animal-like movements and gimmicky gestures were fun. And this is how Abby, sneakily and shadily, like a little serpent, goes after the parents to make underhanded racial backstabbing comments without saying anything, because she knows as a child this is going to be totally off of Nia's radar. She's not going to comprehend the undertones, whereas these are absolutely direct racial undertones that her parents are going to understand. So what Abby's intentions were here at this point, I have no idea, because I don't know why she would have had a problem with Holly. She barely would have interacted with Holly at this point. She just would have been a very educated, well-paying customer that got her kid there on time. Anyways, let's get back into it. It goes on to say, my mom did not, meaning she did not love this solo and the gestures. That night at rehearsal, I could see how upset she was. The emotions playing across her face, I couldn't understand why. When we got home, she shared her concerns about the song choice and choreography with my father. She worried about the racial undertone of it all. Racial undertone? I wasn't entirely sure what that meant. To me, the song wasn't really a big deal. The lyrics are funny, I explained. Even the monkey sounds in the background made people giggle. I was more bothered by my mom's reaction than the song. This was my opportunity to show that I had what it took to be like the other girls, that I could represent the ALDC. Why couldn't she see that? So I can understand why Nia would be upset, but again, it's because she doesn't comprehend these racial undertones and she doesn't understand what is really going on here. Unwilling to break my heart, my parents agreed to let me do the dance. I was happy with their choice because I didn't want to rock the boat. Success at the studio was a delicate balance, and staying in Abby's good graces made things easier. And this is what we saw in the show from the very beginning, over and over and over, and this is a blatant example of how Abby manipulated the children. This was an emotional attack on all of the children and the parents in order to manipulate the children to behave, and not just behave, but to be submissive in their actions towards her because she's dangling a carrot over them. But that's not the only solo with racial undertones, which brings us to Nia's next solo, because, you know, we have to have every solo for Nia be like this. So it says, now 8 years old, I was given another opportunity. This solo routine was choreographed by Abby to a song called Satan's Little Lamb by Sam Harris. When my mom heard the song title, she immediately voiced her concerns to Abby. She'd bitten her tongue about the Natty of the Jungle routine, but she couldn't do so with this one. Now, ironically, I've seen this solo, and Nia, this had like everything in it, including the kitchen sink, the bathroom sink, the shower, the refrigerator, the backyard barbecue. So good, and she was absolutely incredible in this, and you could see all of her potential in this already. But I can understand why Holly would be upset. Rightfully so. She says, my family was not super religious, but we were Christians who believed in God, and we often went to church on Sundays. So this song did not sit well with my parents. They were worried that the context of the song would go against our religious values. Abby reassured my mom that the song was not satanic. My costume was really cute, a white pants and crop top matching set with rows of tassels that added flair to my movements, and the choreography was age appropriate. I agree with all of this. Once again, my parents decided to let me perform because I was so happy to have another solo. So there was always something on the line for the parents and for Nia, and so it was always like this battle of give and take. What is worth it? Which battle should I choose? At what point should I take my kid out? What point is this worth it? Like, those are the kind of questions that you'd be asking yourself, but at the same time, it's like, oh, this is the best choreographer and the best training that I can get in Pittsburgh. This is the best training that I can get on this end of the East Coast. What to do. Now, there is a lot more in this chapter about the racial undertones in the dances and the ridiculous things that Nia was made to do at the ALDC, but I will leave that up to you to go purchase the book and read for yourself. But Nia also goes throughout this chapter to outline her entire journey with RND, which is what we saw in the show where Nia was having the pain in her foot and she was in a wheelchair. If you're interested in that, make sure to go check out the book because she outlines that entire thing in this chapter. But at the end of that, she goes into what happened when she returned to the dance studio after that entire journey being out at the hospital. And it says, how much had I missed out on? As it turned out, a lot. Over at the ALDC, I quickly discovered that my team was no longer at the level it was when I had left, which I feel like every dancer that has ever left for an injury can definitely relate to this. While disappointing, this made sense. The thing that didn't make sense was discovering most of the girls I danced with were now gone. Before my absence, there had been about 18 girls in our troupe. Now we were down to 5. Maddie Ziegler, Paige Highland, Brooke Highland, whom I admired so much, Chloe, and a new girl named Kennedy Trent. Where did everyone go? It was weird that so many people had left in such a short period of time. While my dance technique had regressed during my absence and recovery, the other girls had advanced. I was playing a cruel game of catch-up on a visual stage, and there was a lot to learn. Over the summer, the girls had been taught side aerials and turns, since most were right-handed and their good side was the right, and choreography catered to their strengths accordingly. Though I'm right-handed, my turns and tricks are stronger on the left. As a lefty, I not only had to learn the skill, but also be able to do it on my weaker side. Wait, what? Okay, so this is brand new to me. I assumed that Nia was left-handed the entire time. I always assumed she did things on the left because she was left-handed. But it turns out Nia is actually closer to what I experience because I'm right-handed. And I do my cartwheels and my failed aerials, because I cannot do one at the moment, and haven't landed in an aerial in years and years and years and years and years. But that's all to the left, even though I'm right-handed, but all of my turns are to the right. I've trained really hard to be able to turn to the left, and like my pirouettes are almost equal, but like Alice Cones and full turn sequences, absolutely not. They have to be on the right. So I find that very interesting that Nia is not left-handed. What else do I have that's left-handed? I feel like it's just my acrobatic tricks, which is like, it doesn't line up very well because in order to like do a sequence going into an aerial, like a lot of the time it'll be like chaîné aerial. And my chaîné to the left feels so weak and awkward because it's to the left, but my cartwheels feel, that's the only way that it feels right. So that's held me back with acrobatics a lot, but I didn't know that Nia was the same way. Sort of. I'm curious to know what happened to those 18 girls that she mentioned. I don't know if this is foreshadowing and she's going to mention it later in the book, but I know that there was a lot going on at the studio and that Abby was going bankrupt at the time that the show was starting or about to start, and that I know that Abby mentioned, I believe in her book, or she's mentioned somewhere, that a lot of people were leaving the studio at that time. And I think that it was also the beginning of another recession and people couldn't afford dance classes anymore, so only the like upper middle class and wealthier families like Nia's were able to afford dance classes at this time. So I think that that is what happened, but maybe she'll go into more detail later in the book. Later in this chapter, she does note about how the show got started, so I wanted to talk about that. It says, time seemed to fly by and soon the holiday season had passed. When we returned to the studio in January 2011, I was surprised to see flyers announcing that a production company was coming in to do interviews with the dancers and their moms for a potential documentary, which is what we've heard, that it was supposed to be just a documentary, not a full-length TV show. So it says we had to audition by submitting a tape of ourselves dancing, and then if selected, the dancer and her mother would return for an in-person interview with the producer. It was clear that not everyone would be part of the show, but when I heard about this, I was so excited. It sounded like an amazing opportunity, and what kid wouldn't want to be featured on TV with her friends? Later, we learned the concept of the show was to highlight dance moms and their daughters and the drama that happened behind the scenes. I asked my parents a few times if I could audition, but they weren't sure, which rightfully so. I could see if it was just a dance opportunity, but when you're the principal of a school as the mom and your dad is working a very respectful job that is also very public facing, that would definitely be something to consider, and definitely a huge sacrifice that Holly had to make for sure, and probably Evan as well. But it says this sort of thing just didn't happen in Pittsburgh, which is less glamorous than other cities, so they weren't sure the opportunity was legitimate, which that definitely makes sense as well, and not some sort of scam. It didn't help that at this time, there were countless contests advertised on the radio or television claiming to be able to help children become the next star, for a price, of course. Yeah, very true. There was so many different things in this time period being like, become the next Disney Channel star. All you have to do is fork over $1,000 and take this workshop, and there'll be real life casting directors there that are not going to take you on as a client. So it says, but we soon learned the reason behind the opportunity. Apparently, Abby had been complaining about the moms to a friend, John Corella, who knew a producer named Brian Stinson. John spoke with Brian about what he learned from Abby, and together they created a concept for the show. By the time the audition flyers were hanging in the dance studio, the show had supposedly already been picked up by Lifetime. There was nothing particularly spectacular about our dance studio. We were in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, is a residential neighborhood. Perhaps that was the part of the charm. You can find a star anywhere in America. The show seemed to promise. Maybe even in your own backyard or in your classroom sitting next to you. Okay, while I get that and I understand that to a certain degree, I never went to any studio or taught at any studio where there was like a Brooke Highland or a Maddie Ziegler. I had a previous studio owner that would crap on the show all the time, and people there would talk about how their students were better than the kids on Dance Moms, and I'm like, Blink twice if you're okay, because which student? Which one? Show me one. Like, there was not. Anyways, that is how the show got started, but I don't know. Were they completely relatable? I don't really think so. I think that Abby was definitely like the cream of the crop. Not necessarily all of the United States, or maybe not even for that entire area, but like she trained cream of the crop dancers. Even if she was a horrible person most of the time, she was really knowledgeable about technique and what they're looking for in a dance competition. And she trained the kids through whatever aggressive approaches she used, for them to understand and to perform that way. But I wouldn't say that they were that relatable or just like every studio. The studios that you saw in Abby's Studio Rescue, if you watch that show, that is a better representation of your average studio across America and Canada. So they had some reservations. My parents finally agreed to let me try out. We compiled clips from my performances, and my mom was invited to schedule an interview. She was working on her dissertation for her doctorate at the time, and she was still the principal of the middle and elementary school, so it took a little finagling to find a slot that would work. Holly is the epitome of a working mom. That is way too much for me. That's like Kim Kardashian level, like playing a lawyer on a TV series full-time while playing, like in the scripted series, I think it's called All That's Fair or something. I don't remember the title, but she's like playing a lawyer in that, plus filming a reality show, plus she's going to law school and taking her LSAT or whatever it's called. Like, that's so much work on top of like doing all these appearances and stuff. And people say the Kardashians are lazy. I don't know, maybe some of them, but certainly not Kim Kardashian. She's like on the same level as Holly. Same level of work. Holly's education is probably far superior to Kim Kardashian's at this point, but we'll see. Anyways, I'm rambling. The interview with Brian Stinson was held in Studio B. Mom and I sat down across from him and had a simple conversation. Mom had let me do my own makeup, so I had glitter all over my face, plus a tiara on my head, and I was wearing the costume from my Natty of the Jungle performance. Okay, sounds charming. Sounds like a very relatable kid for like 8 or 9. Why do you love dance? Brian asked. What are your goals? He wanted us to tell him more about life at the studio. Of course, my dream had always been to win a crown, so I mentioned it. He loved the idea that I had this fixation on winning a title. He also wanted to know how my mom felt about my relationship with the other girls, and he wanted to get a sense for the depth of her relationship with the other moms. The interview concluded with him asking us about Abby and what it was like working with her. We were candid in saying that Abby had a habit of typecasting me, but it was just an offhand remark. Abby really wasn't a focal point in the beginning. In fact, Brian seemed more interested in the fact that I was distracted by the stink bugs crawling around, something he remembered long after that moment. So I think that that's hilarious. The stink bugs get mentioned so often, not just in this book, but just from anybody that's ever went to the ALDC. So it sounds like they were definitely a problem. But it's also sounding like some foreshadowing that Brian picked up on this racial undertone and typecasting and was like, you know what? Why don't we just drive that home throughout this entire series? After the interview, she and her mom got in the car, and her mom told her not to get her hopes up because she thought that they wouldn't get picked. She said they were probably too boring. They knew the producers were also looking at another studio in California, and they just tried to stay realistic about it. Then about a month later, while her family was eating dinner, she thinks it was Hamburger Helper, the phone rang. When she answered, it was Brian calling to say they wanted them on the show, which was going to be called Just Dance at that point. He said 2 people had already agreed to be a part of it and wanted to know if she would join too. When the show first came along, none of the families were thinking about long-term fame or turning dance moms into a cultural phenomenon. They were told the project was only supposed to be like 6 weeks, and because of that, they approached the whole thing like it was this small opportunity, something that might be fun and maybe lead to something, but nothing that they were anchoring their lives to. The problem was the contract. The network gave them an agreement that, according to their lawyer, was honestly terrible. The terms didn't protect the kids, didn't give the families much power, and benefited Lifetime and the production more than anyone else. But the moms felt trapped. They knew that if they pushed back too hard, the network would simply replace them with the next batch of kids who were hungry for a shot. So there was this underlying fear: if we don't accept this, someone else will, and we'll lose our one and only chance. Even though the lawyer said, please don't sign this, the pressure to not be replaced made them ignore that advice entirely, and they managed to get a few small changes made, but the contract still wasn't good. Once filming started, their lives were swallowed whole. The production schedule was brutal, long shoot days on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, and then competitions every weekend. That meant the girls weren't just dancing, they were doing schoolwork, rehearsing, performing, and being filmed nonstop. And on top of that, every single week they had to learn new choreography for the show. It wasn't like normal studio life where you rehearse a piece for months to polish it. Instead, they were thrown into brand new numbers that were rushed, high pressure, and meant to be camera ready almost immediately. There was usually just one actual run through on stage before competing, so just one shot, that was it. And when something went wrong, which was almost unavoidable given the pace, that opened the door for Abby to come down on them hard. Everything became another reason for her to yell, critique, or remind them that they weren't allowed to mess up. Competitions themselves were always complicated by the presence of film crew. Normal dance moms and teams at these events weren't always thrilled to suddenly find TV cameras everywhere, blocking hallways or setting up equipment. Backstage could get awkward too. There might be adult cameramen and crew walking around while kids were changing, simply because everybody was squished into the same small space and the show needed to capture footage. Now, at this point, because filming real competitions was becoming too chaotic, both for the show and the venues, the production eventually shifted to more controlled competition environments. Some of these were real competitions, but arranged in a way that allowed the show to function without interfering with the entire event. But even with these changes, the stakes were still real. The girls still competed for genuine scores, real placements, and real judges. Nothing about the outcome was scripted. So, through all of this, the girls had almost no free time. Their schedules became a constant loop of school, rehearsal, filming, and competing. And being part of the original cast didn't give them any special treatment back at home either. Their own studio teachers still expected full attendance, technique, commitment, and growth. Nothing was relaxed for them just because they were on a TV show. In my opinion, this chapter really shows how overwhelming the industry was, especially for kids. It's almost worse now, in my opinion. Between like the production schedule and the contract pressures and the competition environment and then Abby's expectations all weighing on you at the same time, like that's so much. Even though the show is entertaining to watch, living inside it was exhausting for Nia, emotionally draining and incredibly demanding. It was a nonstop balance act between being a kid who danced and being a kid who was essentially working in show business full-time without understanding that this was in fact a job. Okay, so chapter 4 is basically Nia pulling back the curtain on what the dressing room reality of Dance Moms was actually like, and honestly, it's like way less glamorous than what you might imagine. Or I don't know, maybe you have a realistic view. But anyways, if anything, it was definitely chaotic, emotional, and full of these like little moments that shaped her whole experience on the show. And let's get into a dressing room that wasn't really a dressing room. First off, the dressing rooms everyone saw on TV, yeah, they were hardly actually dressing rooms. Most of the time they were cramped up classrooms or random backstage storage spaces that competitions cleared out last minute. You'd walk in and it felt like the kind of room you'd get stuck in during a tornado drill, like fluorescent lights, weird smells, tables that were too small, and absolutely no personal space. And of course, empty chair. And she still didn't have a solo. Now, imagine 20 people, like girls, moms, producers, camera guys, all jammed into that one tiny room with half-functioning AC, or like no AC, in Florida, for example. That was the norm. And Nia talks about how the second they walked into these rooms, the energy like completely shifted. All the pressure and intensity that built up during the week suddenly came to like an absolute head. People were stressed, tired, defensive, and carrying their own expectations of how the day should go. So any tiny spark, like someone's costume wasn't steamed, someone was crying, someone was running late, could turn the whole room upside down. And this is the part that I feel like I never really think about while watching the show. Like, there's moments where you'll see a camera guy, and then it's like, okay, there's the camera guy. But you don't think about the fact that there's a whole crew of camera people there. And, like, I work on set all the time in television and in film. And like all of that equipment and all of those people, it's like an entire circus. There's so many people. So to think that that was always just like off screen in the tiny little dance studios while they were filming, or that there was that many people cramped into these dressing rooms with them while they were rehearsing, I don't know. It's too much. Anyway, so let's talk about the hair and makeup and like this unspoken competition. You'll understand what I mean in a second. So another huge part of the dressing room life was the hair and makeup. Every mom had their own system, as we saw. Like you saw like all those gorgeous like fold out glamazon vanity sets that a lot of them had. Well, every mom had their own system, and you could tell instantly who had been doing competition glam for years versus who was still figuring things out. But here's the thing, on Dance Moms, hair and makeup weren't just prep, they were televised. That meant everything became a silent competition. Who had the smoothest bun? Whose makeup got Abby's approval? Who looked stage ready the fastest? And Abby definitely had opinions, loud, dramatic ones, especially about Nia's appearance. Like, Nia explains that Abby would critique things like her hair texture, her makeup shades, and even the way certain products looked on her skin. And it wasn't constructive criticism. It was usually her comparing Nia to the other girls and saying she didn't fit in. Now, I just wanted to read one direct excerpt from chapter 4 on this specific topic. So Nia's talking about how Abby was always annoyed that she was out of place and that she didn't visually fit in with the other girls. And so in this excerpt it says, according to Abby, my entire appearance made the group less uniform. There would be sighs of exasperation and reminders of what I had to do to make costumes or shoes work to match my skin tone. Slowly, I began to internalize this negativity and became self-conscious. I had always been vibrant, energetic, and sure of myself, but this type of criticism was damaging for a 10-year-old. One time during season 2, I had my hair in braids. It was a protective style, and I received approval from production. Any major change to our hair color, cut, or style had to be approved by production because of the need for continuity. Abby told me that I needed to fix my hair because it looked awful. She said, on camera no less, it's like a log coming out of the side of her head. Once in rehearsal, Abby asked me, don't you just wish you had white girl hair? I was taken aback by her question, but I responded, no. Oh, really? She said. Like, don't you think it would be so much easier? Again, I told her, no. It didn't matter what she said. I knew I didn't want to be white. Unlike the other exchange, this one never aired. Okay, this is one of the more racist things that I've ever heard come out of Abby's mouth. Why are you asking a black woman who has no control over the hair that grows out of her head and has no control over changing this hair growing out of her head, even if she wanted to? What is the point of asking her whether she wishes she had white girl hair? Aside from you to try and be racist and to make a dig at the little child to make her feel self-conscious of her own race and things that she cannot change at all. And then there's the costume chaos. Costumes were another dressing room battle entirely, and when I say battle, I mean literally scrambling. So sometimes the costumes arrived like last minute, sometimes pieces were missing, sometimes they didn't fit at all. And in the book, Nia remembers moments where she'd put a costume on and Abby would immediately say it didn't flatter her or that she looked wrong in it, and she'd say that in front of everyone. Meanwhile, the cameras were rolling, so whatever insecurity you were feeling, immortalized. And it wasn't like the girls had time to swap things out or customize or even the free will to do that. So they wore whatever the show or studio had thrown together that week. That meant a lot of adjusting, pinning, and just hoping things didn't rip while you're performing. And the moms, they were basically seamstresses in fight or flight mode. And then, of course, you had tension so thick you could slice it. One of the biggest themes of this chapter, in my opinion, is the mom's energy in the dressing room. So, like, competition day wasn't stressful enough, right? But on the show, tensions were always doubled because there were layers, like normal dance competition nerves, plus stress about Abby's expectations, plus the pressure of being filmed, plus moms competing with each other, plus producers stirring the pot, plus on top of that, the kids absorbing all of it. And then, like, I'm just thinking on top of that, everybody else your age, watching the TV show and all of your family. Anyways, so in this chapter, Nia talks about how the dressing room was where she witnessed most of the mom drama firsthand, like arguments about their solos, costumes, favoritism, rehearsals. It all happened in like these tiny rooms where the girls tried to get ready to go on stage because they had to perform. So sometimes the moms didn't realize the kids could hear literally every word. Other times they knew it and said it anyways. And you'd think the producers might intervene to keep things peaceful, but no, they loved it. Every little drop. Nia explains in this chapter that as a kid, she just wanted to do her best on stage, but staying focused was almost impossible when the dressing room was full of arguments, tears, and pressure. She learned to tune things out by pretending she wasn't in the room. So, like, casually dissociating at a young age. She'd sit quietly doing her own makeup, humming songs to herself, or mentally rehearsing choreography. It became her little, like, mental shield against all of the noise. She also learned to comfort the other girls. So, like, if one of them cried because Abby yelled at them or because a mom said something hurtful, Nia would be the one sitting next to them trying to calm them down. And I feel like we saw this on the show. And she ended up turning into, like, the emotional glue for the group, even though she was hurting too. But let's talk about the double standards, because this chapter makes it very clear. Nia faced double standards, like, constantly. Whether it was her hair, her makeup, her costumes, or her critiques, she often felt like she was starting from like a completely different baseline than all of the other girls. Abby would compare her directly to kids whose appearance or style naturally aligned with the look Abby wanted. Another tall, skinny blonde. And the dressing room was usually where Nia heard those critiques the loudest. So it was like raw, uncomfortable, and honestly damaging, and honestly right before she went on stage every single time. And Nia didn't realize until she was older just like how damaging, but at the time she just took it silently because she wanted to dance and she wanted to do good and she wanted Abby to be proud of her. But despite everything, the tension, the pressure, the criticism, Nia still went out on stage every single week and gave it her all. The dressing room was chaotic, but it was also where she learned resilience, independence, and how to hold herself high, keep her shit together in high stress, high pressure environments. So she learned to get ready quickly. She learned to fix her own makeup. She learned to stand strong even when she felt singled out. She learned how to comfort others. She learned how to survive a space where adults didn't always act like adults. The dressing room was by no means glamorous, but it was where Nia became tougher, more patient, and more aware of how the adult world really worked. So basically, chapter 4 is Nia saying, those dressing rooms shaped me more than the stage ever did. They were where she saw the truth behind the show, where she faced the pressures no kid should face, where she learned to navigate adult conflict and adult expectations, all while still trying to be a child with a passion for dance. All right, you guys, thoughts, comments, opinions? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I am fully invested at this point. Thank you guys to all the support hyping the videos lately. We are going to be continuing on with our deep dive exploring Nia Su's new book, Bottom of the Pyramid. We're going to be talking about and exploring chapter 5, which is called At the Bottom. Now, this chapter is the absolute meat and potatoes of this book so far, so let's hop right into it. Okay, so chapter 5 is basically Nia finally explaining what it really felt like to be labeled the bottom of the pyramid week after week. And this chapter hits a lot harder than people might expect. So essentially, the chapter opens up with Nia saying something she never fully admitted when she was younger. Being placed at the bottom of Abby's pyramid over and over wasn't just annoying, it actually hurt. It made her feel like she was always starting at a disadvantage, like she had to work twice as hard just to prove she deserved to be there. So Nia says in the book that Pyramid took up the entire filming time on Wednesdays, so we pretty much have heard that before, but she goes on to say that anyone who has seen Dance Moms knows that Maddie is an incredible dancer who deserves all of her accolades. She was also Abby's favorite, so she received the most and best solos. In season 4, she became a breakout star for being featured in Sia's music video for her song Chandelier, and then was the face of Sia for years to come. Opportunity after opportunity came her way. Maddie is a hard worker, but she also had certain advantages that the rest of us weren't afforded. For example, because she was homeschooled early on, she sometimes got to learn choreography before the rest of us. It was frustrating when Abby would criticize the rest of us on camera for not being able to pick up choreography as quickly as Maddie or not refining our movements the way Maddie did when she'd had more time to perfect the dances. And the truth is, Maddie is a fast learner, so she didn't need the extra time anyways. After Dance Moms ended and I had some time to reflect, I started to wonder whether the whole point of the show had been to make Maddie a star. Abby favored Maddie, and production seemed to cater to what Abby wanted. It was hurtful to look back and realize I was never going to get the same opportunities Maddie had, no matter how hard I worked or how long I stayed. To a degree, it felt like the rest of us dancers were expendable pawns, and the pyramid was everywhere. It wasn't just a filming gimmick. It shaped how the moms treated each other. It shaped how the girls viewed each other. It created this unspoken social hierarchy that followed them around all week, all season, year after year. So when Abby stuck Nia at the bottom, it wasn't just symbolic. It influenced how everyone else behaved towards her. She felt invisible, underestimated, and constantly fighting to be seen. Nia also says in this chapter that I was at the bottom. I wasn't getting granted the same opportunities as the other girls or even any opportunity to showcase what I brought to the team. I was shoved in the back of the group dances and strategically hidden behind other dancers. Even the girls themselves were starting to buy into the narrative. I remember another teammate, Kendall Vertez, who had joined the team back in season 2, rolling her eyes whenever she found out we were paired for a duet together. To see firsthand that someone didn't want to dance with me really stung. Worst of all, being at the bottom meant there was no room for me to grow. I went 7 months without being given a solo. That's a long time when you go to dance competitions every weekend. And Abby's critiques hit different. What made it harder was that the critiques thrown at Nia weren't always about dance. They were often about her personality, about things she couldn't control, or about how she compared to the other girls. Like how we talked about in the last video, Abby asking her things like, don't you wish that you just had a white girl hair? Not something that she can control. There were moments where Abby acted like Nia's spot at the bottom was just her place, almost like she belonged there permanently. But whenever Nia tried to internalize it and stay quiet, she still ended up being scolded. And if she pushed herself and worked hard, well, she was still told it wasn't enough. She could literally not win. This wasn't just a tough teacher situation. It was a cycle, a pattern that reinforced the idea that Nia was never supposed to rise too high. This led to feeling like a pawn in the game, and can you blame her? One of the strongest points in the chapter is when Nia explains how she eventually realized that a lot of what happened to her wasn't really about her, it was about storylines. Nia said she felt like the producers and Abby treated her like a chess piece, someone they could move around to spark drama. If Abby needed to boost another girl's confidence or create rivalry, Nia got pushed lower. If she needed a sentimental moment or an underdog theme, suddenly her struggles became a storyline. She was a kid, but she felt like an adult's tool. And what's worse, the moms would get wrapped up in these storylines too. They'd argue about the pyramid, argue about solos, argue about who deserved what, and the kids would absorb all that tension without understanding the behind-the-scenes manipulation happening around them. So let's talk about the kids carrying the weight of all of these adult problems, because Nia makes it very clear. The environment forced the kids to take on the adult stress. Nia talks about sitting in the studio or the green room hearing grown women argue about her or her abilities like she wasn't even there. She'd be trying to stretch or practice while listening to people debate whether she deserved a spot on the team. Kids aren't supposed to deal with that. Kids aren't supposed to feel responsible for grown adult conflicts, but on the show, they did every single week. And she also remembers how torn she felt because she loved dancing, she loved performing, and she loved her teammates. But loving something doesn't make the pressure feel any less real. And despite all of this, the bottom placements, the critiques, the pressure, Nia kept showing up with a positive attitude. That wasn't something people always noticed about her, and she explains in this chapter that her positivity wasn't fake. It was a survival strategy. She learned that if she didn't keep her spirits up, she would absolutely crumble under the pressure. She tried to focus on getting better, on celebrating small wins, on maintaining her friendships, and on proving people wrong in her own quiet way. But that didn't mean it was easy. Deep down, the pyramid still stung. Every time she was placed on the bottom, she felt embarrassed, especially when she didn't think she deserved to be at the bottom. But she swallowed all those feelings because she didn't want to start drama or cry on camera. But when the cameras stopped, the feelings didn't. One of the most emotional parts of the chapter is how Nia describes the aftermath. What happened after long filming days, when the cameras were finally off. Sometimes she would go home and replay moments in her head. Was I really that bad? Why does she always pick on me? What did I do wrong? Will I ever get a chance to shine? These are heavy questions for a kid, especially one navigating real life and reality television at the same time. Her mom would try to reassure her, but even Holly couldn't undo how repetitive the criticism felt. Nia started to internalize the feeling that she was less than, even though she was giving 110% every single day. But here's where things shift. Nia actually started to find her own real strength. So towards the end of the chapter, Nia talks about something that I thought was very powerful, how being at the bottom of the pyramid actually shaped who she became. She learned resilience, she learned patience, she learned how to push through when people underestimated her, she learned how to stay gracious when it would have been easier to just lash out and crash out. And she learned not to let someone else's ranking, especially one created for television, determine her worth. Being at the bottom hurt, but it also taught her to grow thicker skin and to find her own voice. And it motivated her to carve out her own identity outside of what Abby or anybody else decided for her. The pyramid tried to define her. She chose to define herself instead. So chapter 5 ends with Nia basically saying, I may have been placed at the bottom, but I didn't stay there emotionally. She recognizes now that she was never the weak link. She was just a kid caught in the system that thrived on ranking, comparison, and drama. And surviving that made her stronger than she realized at the time. So honestly, chapter 6 feels like the chapter where everything in Nia's world stopped being dance drama and turned into real conflict. The kind that spreads outside the studio, into the public, into social media, and even into the relationships between the moms and the kids. When I read it, it really hit me how overwhelming it must have been for her to live this. So the chapter opens with Nia explaining how once the show started taking off, the ALDC wasn't just a dance studio anymore, it was a pressure cooker. A real-life human pressure cooker. Every rehearsal felt higher stakes, every competition had more eyes on them, and every argument seemed to last longer because cameras fed off of the tension. She talks about how she could feel the heaviness in the air before the moms even said a word. And the thing is, the girls handled the tension differently than the adults. While the moms were arguing about solos, choreography, or Abby's choices, the kids were sort of stuck in this weird limbo where they pretended everything was normal, but they could hear every word. They knew when their mom was mad, they knew when Abby was mad, and somehow they still had to perform as if nothing was wrong. One excerpt from chapter 6 says, our most controversial dance was Topless Showgirls, performed in season 2. And by the way, I made an entire mini documentary about this because it was one of the banned Dance Moms episodes, so if you haven't seen that one, that is up on my channel if you want to go watch it. She says, we had skimpy costumes with huge fans that we waved around in front of us as we moved across the dance floor. Abby kept stressing that the fans were meant to entice the audience, leaving them wanting more. Clearly, the sexual connotation of this dance was inappropriate given our ages, but her intention was to shock the judges, hoping it would secure a win. Abby was super passionate about this dance, but the moms agreed it was a little too edgy for our age group. This episode has since been banned. You cannot stream it or find it anywhere online. Our costume choice wasn't the real issue because we used the same costume about 2 weeks later in a dance called Nip Tuck. I'm guessing the problem was the overall effect of the costume, the choreography, and the theme. One of the most interesting things she talks about in this chapter is how the show edited arguments and turned them into like dramatic moments, but the reality was always more complicated than what we were seeing as the viewer. So some things were exaggerated, some things were oversimplified, sometimes the drama came from things happening off camera that viewers never even saw, and because the public only saw the edited version, they formed their opinions about the girls and the moms based off of something that was completely unfair. So that public scrutiny hit Nia hard. Like, this is where she explains how strange it was and how strange it felt to be a kid, to have strangers online analyzing you, judging your talent, comparing you to your teammates, arguing about you and your mom. She wasn't even old enough to have social media, but she was old enough to hear about people talking about her at competitions or see the headlines or overhear adults whispering about something that happened on TV. So it made normal life feel not normal at all, basically. So she talks about how kids at school treated her differently because she was still in school. And some people wanted to be her friend because she was on TV. And then, of course, there was others that were jealous of her because she was on TV. And then there was others who were like weirdly invested in her drama with the other girls. Like these were actual middle schoolers picking sides in storylines created by adults. So imagine being 10 and hearing, "Why did your mom say that to Abby?" Or, "Do you actually hate the other girls?" Like, that's so much to put on a child. And then there's the conflict inside the studio. So Nia goes into detail about how frustrating it was to be stuck in the middle when Abby had an issue with Holly, her mom. So, because when Abby was upset at a mom, whether or not they did anything wrong, the kid felt it first. And Nia, being the kind, quiet, hard-working one, often got hit with the ripple effects of everything, whether her mom even did anything, but she felt like she had to take on the emotional fallout from the conflicts that she didn't even start, and she couldn't say anything about it. She had to just keep dancing and keep quiet. And it gets even deeper when she talks about certain routines and controversies that made her uncomfortable, like moments where the themes or the choreography or how she was treated or compared to the other girls didn't really sit right with her. She didn't have the language for it back then, but reading it now, you can tell she's describing microaggressions and like subtle exclusion or like subtle bullying. So another excerpt from chapter 6 reads, "At rehearsal one afternoon during the filming for season 2, episode 10, Abby was fussing because we hadn't placed in the competition the week before. She went through pyramid, of course. I was at the bottom, again, even though Abby was upset with the other girls as well. I was so excited to be given a solo that week, and if you watch the episode, you can see my joy radiating through my smile. Maddie, Chloe, and Paige had a trio, but Paige had to have surgery on her feet, so she wasn't sure she could participate. My mom discussed the situation with the other moms, and everyone agreed that I would be a good fit for the routine, so she came down to the studio and asked Abby if I could be Paige's swing, to do her part if she couldn't do it. While it was an honor to be given a solo, I was constantly being overlooked for trios, and this seemed like a perfect natural opportunity to fill in. Abby said that had been her plan all along, and then got angry with my mom for asking. My mom was flabbergasted. If Abby was planning to do exactly what she was asking, why wouldn't she just say that? It could have been a win-win. Things escalated quickly, and my mom got frustrated. A mother looking out for her daughter trumps the word of a dance teacher, she finally said. This made Abby livid. She firmly believed that you abdicated all rights when you entered the studio. You had to obey everything she said, no exceptions or negotiations. This part of the argument made it to the air, but there was quite a bit more that didn't. As they argued, Abby began talking about how I was the weak link and admitted she'd never asked for me to be on the show. She went on and on and on about her vision for the ALDC and its competition team. She wanted a line of skinny girls who were the same height with blonde hair and blue eyes. She then proceeded to say that she didn't ask for a tootie, referring to Kim Field's character on the hit 1980s show The Facts of Life. The subtext of the statement that she didn't ask for a black girl to be on her team of all white dancers hit hard. She later referred to this incident in her book, writing, "What were these producers thinking? Did any of them know about dance? What was I going to do with this team of misfit toys? Were they casting a new version of the Facts of Life TV show or a competitive dance team? Some taller than others, some skinnier than others, some older than others, and some way better than others." That Tootie comment was the last straw. My mom lost it. I could see the look on Abby's face while my mom was going off on her. Abby turned beet red. She stalked towards me and yanked me by the arm, knocking me off balance. I was shocked that the situation had escalated to the point where Abby would put her hands on me. My mom got in Abby's face and told her never to touch me again. Abby was enraged. "No solo for you," she yelled as she kicked me out of the studio. Nia also kind of explains in this chapter how some conflicts weren't between like two people, they were just internal conflicts. So she wrestled with wanting to be good and wanting to shine, but also wanting to make her mom proud, but also wanting to avoid being the center of the drama. And that was practically impossible on a show built around drama. One of the strongest points she makes in this chapter is the controversy didn't just affect her emotionally, it affected her opportunities. So when there was tension between Abby and Holly, suddenly Nia got fewer solos, or she wouldn't get opportunities outside of the studio. She had fewer featured moments, fewer chances to show how talented she was, and as a kid, she didn't understand why adult conflicts translated into professional consequences for her personally. But despite all the mess, she also talks about how these conflicts forced her to grow a thicker skin, to understand both the good and the ugly parts of being in the spotlight, and to realize that not every narrative created was true. By the end of the chapter, she makes it clear that controversy might have followed her, but it didn't define her. She survived it. She learned from it, and she walked away stronger. Not because the environment was healthy, but because she refused to let it break her. The end of chapter 6 reads, "I know people wonder why I came back and stayed. My family and I made that choice because production assured us that conditions would improve, and to an extent they did. If we felt like the work environment was hostile, we would contact our attorneys, the network, and production to address the situation. We'd drawn a line in the sand. We stayed because I had earned my place on this TV show, and I deserved to be there. What's more, I was finally seeing the results I always wanted. One of my biggest accomplishments during season 4 that unfortunately wasn't shown on Dance Moms was receiving that crown I had dreamed about as a kid. In 2014, I won my first national title. It was a big deal at the dance studio, and all the students at the studio were so happy for me. I was crying on stage as they crowned me. Despite Abby's best efforts to keep me down, little Nia was getting everything she ever wanted. Abby wasn't going to be given the satisfaction of getting rid of the Tootie." So that was chapter 6. Let me know your thoughts, but let's just hop right into chapter 7. So chapter 7 is all about aftershocks and moving forward. Chapter 7 felt like one of those chapters where everything finally catches up emotionally. The stuff that's been building in the background, the conversations that needed to happen, the realizations that only come once the dust of everything settles. When I finished it, it kind of felt like I was watching someone exhale after holding their breath for years, like finally maybe seeing the light after the end of survival mode. So here's how it landed for me. Basically, is about picking up the pieces. Like, the chapter opens up with this feeling of Nia standing in the middle of her own life after a storm has passed. Like, things had finally quieted down, the drama, the accusations, the noise, but it left her with this weird mix of relief and confusion, like, okay, the chaos stopped, so now what? You can tell she was finally starting to see what things actually were without all the pressure and influence of producers and moms and drama and expectations swirling around her. But in order to understand what really happened, the whole vibe we're going for is like, now that I'm older, let me actually look back and understand all of this. She starts breaking things down, like not in a bitter way, not in a like victim-y way, but in this really grounded, reflective tone. She starts making sense of why conflicts happened, why certain adults acted the way they did, without excusing their behavior, but like being able to understand it more. and how being a kid in that environment shaped her identity without her really even realizing it at the time. It's the difference between being a child inside an experience and being an adult analyzing the same experience from the outside. So in chapter 7, Nia talks a lot about when Brooke and Paige left the studio and the altercation between Kelly and Abby, and then she also talks about the altercation between Christy and Abby, and when Chloe left the studio, and how she was upset because when Chloe left the studio, she actually cut her off, and they didn't start talking again until Chloe came back in season 7. But one excerpt from chapter 7 says about Chloe's departure and JoJo Siwa entering the studio. Following Chloe's departure, JoJo Siwa, along with her mom, Jesselyn, joined the show. JoJo and I eventually had a good relationship, but the beginning was a bit rocky. She had a huge personality, unlike anything I had seen or been around before. Along with that personality came an enormous ego and not much empathy to what us fellow dancers were going through. One of the first comments she made to the girls was that she was there to replace Chloe. The new and better blonde on the team, she called herself. She told us we were washed up and that she brought light to the team. Not only was I annoyed, but I was also surprised to hear a kid talk like this. No other dancer had ever come onto the team and been so unapologetically themselves. It was like she wasn't afraid of anyone, including Abby. JoJo's presence created an awkward vibe between the girls because for the most part, we were pretty nice to anyone who came on the show, but JoJo got on everyone's nerves, including mine. It was like she was going out of her way to ruffle feathers and to get a reaction out of us. She shook up the team dynamic, for better or for worse. And honestly, from my own perspective, reading that sounds a lot like Sister Wives or a cult. Like, you join the cult and then everybody has to, haze the new member because they're like, oh, we don't like you because you have different standards and we have to obey everybody and we have to do all of these different things. So you should have to do all of these different things as well. Some churches are like that as well. It's like how they bully people into subordination. Anyways, this excerpt continues to read, around this time, the Dance Moms cast had also begun spending more time in Los Angeles because Abby was looking to expand. Granddad, who was now 82, was getting sicker, adding to the emotional turmoil I already felt. And to make matters worse, it seemed like JoJo and her mom used every opportunity to try to push me out of dances. Jess would constantly speak about how I wasn't needed and say that JoJo could take my place in group dances. Jess had come to Dance Moms, and before that, its spin-off show, Abby's Ultimate Dance Competition, with a calculated plan to make JoJo a star. Honestly, that's pretty smart. Make the most of the opportunities that come to you, right? But what doesn't sit right with me is doing that at the expense of someone else. I learned at a very young age that in the public eye, any attention is attention, whether it be good attention or just attention, JoJo told People magazine in 2024. Jess and JoJo may have played up their behavior for the cameras, but what they were doing affected my real life. They knew I was struggling because of my grandfather, yet they showed me no mercy. The behavior may have been fake, but the impact on me was not. With most of the original cast members and their moms gone, my mom and I became even more of a target for Abby, though my mom continued to stand up to her for a while. One of the big themes is how she learned the difference between speaking up and protecting her peace. It wasn't about staying silent, it was about realizing that not every argument is worth the emotional toll. So, sometimes you gotta choose your battles. Not every moment needed to become a public fight. It's that moment in life when you go, I don't owe everyone an explanation, I owe myself clarity. She was learning how to advocate for herself without constantly being dragged into the chaos of other people's expectations. And then it was time for her to rebuild her inner circle. Something that stood out is how she talked about her relationships shifting, like friendships, family dynamics, professional relationships. It wasn't dramatic. It was more like, who actually shows up for me when the cameras are off? Who understands me without me having to perform? Who supports me growing, even if that growth means me changing? This chapter is like her quietly choosing people who feel safe and letting go the ones who made her feel small or over-controlled. Chapter 7 also talks about all of her music career and all of the people that she worked with, like Coco Jones and Aubrey O'Day, and also goes into all of the details about how Abby threatened to pay $10,000 to get her music career stopped.
I want you to understand this is an extreme amount of drama, but I strongly believe that you have to do what's right for you.
Thus far, this LA trip has been challenging, and Abby has not been a good manager for Nia.
If this doesn't make you hate Abby Lee Miller, I do not know what will.
As a child, there was nothing I loved more than dance. I started dancing at the age of 2, and then when I was 9 years old, I had the opportunity of a lifetime to join the original cast of Dance Moms. Each week, we were assigned new choreography, performed at dance competitions, and managed the pressure of giving 110%, despite having a teacher who tore us down more times than she ever built us up.
So it reads, I was so excited. At the beginning of each season, the moms met with the producers to talk about anything that we wanted to have them follow or highlight, and my mom mentioned Aubrey seeking me out and wanting to help me pursue music. This is Aubrey O'Day that she's referring to.
So I decided I'm going to reach out to some people that Abby introduced me to that could hopefully help out Nia. Aubrey expressed interest in Nia. Aubrey is a singer-songwriter. She was part of a girl group called Danny Defame, and she was also part of making the band with P. Diddy.
So it says, the producers loved this and wanted to showcase the story. Cameras would follow me around and capture my music journey. I was nervous but thrilled about this new opportunity outside of the show. I couldn't wait to get started. Now, as we know, Nia wanted to pursue music her entire life. That's probably why she was staying on this team for so many seasons. One of the big reasons is to get her music started. So this was finally that moment where Nia was getting her break, where she could get started in music. We probably all remember this from watching the show.
I decided to call her last week to see if she was interested in working with Nia.
Who sings the best?
Nia.
Why are you giving her a single?
This is Holly. How are you, Nia's mom?
How are you?
I've been meaning to give you a call to see if you might be interested in working with Nia.
My heart rate is already racing. I can barely breathe. It just stresses me out. So fast forward to one day after Pyramid. Abby was in a raging mood because my mom had called her out. Okay, typical. After the moms left the studio to sit in the waiting area, we dancers came in to stretch and get ready to start learning our piece for the week as we normally did. Since we were in LA, the moms were stationed in the waiting area of the building with a TV, allowing them to see but not hear what was happening. So this is new to me. I knew that there was a TV in the room, we saw that, but I didn't know that there was no volume until now, so that is interesting.
I'm gonna take matters into my own hands.
I can't believe I'm here with Aubrey O'Day.
We were just talking about it.
I know Miss Abby doesn't really approve of me doing this, but this is the reason why we came out to LA.
Abby was sitting in her chair going on about one thing or another. Then all of a sudden she took out her cell phone and made a call. She put the phone on speaker while I continued stretching with the other girls, not paying much attention to her. Once the call connected and I heard the voice on the other end of the line, however, I froze. It was Aubrey.
My assumption was that this was something they were asking me to do, like, for you as your friend.
Abby told her that she'd heard we were working together. As she said this, she looked right at me. She went on to tell Aubrey that my mom wasn't supposed to contact her behind Abby's back, that she was my manager, and that she was hurt by my mother using one of her contacts to make an underhanded deal. She then offered Aubrey $10,000 not to work with me. That is so fucking asinine. I'm blown away by that. But also, we remember this scene on the show. I remember Abby making this phone call and saying, the mother went behind my back, but they cut this all out. We didn't see her make a $10,000 to Aubrey, or a $10,000 to Aubrey not to work with Nia anymore.
So y'all want to get started?
Yeah, let's do this.
Aubrey has been incredibly supportive of Nia. She put us in touch with her people. We're gonna create this song with or without Abby.
If life is a dance, you better own it. Never have no fear, don't ever show it.
Throw your little, attitude on it.
So, Aubrey, I just had a situation with one of the moms. It was ugly. I wish I had it on videotape so I could send it to you. Holly, the woman that called you, behind my back. They lie and they go to my friends and they use them. Holly's been at the studio for enough years to know what happens to people who go behind my back.
So it says, I was a pretty tough kid to break, but Abby's cruel bribe made me crumble. I was crushed. Literally the one good thing I'd had going for me was just ruined. I remember that awful gut-wrenching feeling of my heart sinking to my stomach. It was like someone had ripped out my insides and thrown them on the ground. Now, if you notice, this happened every time Nia was given an opportunity. Abby had to shut that down. In Abby's reality, there is no reality in which Nia is a successful person and gets better opportunities than what Abby has envisioned for her. Let that soak in. That is why it is so triggering to a narcissist to see you succeed, because they've already decided that in their reality, success doesn't happen for people like you. Success happens for people like me. So that's why Abby is so fucking triggered by this, that she needs to put a complete stop to it. So it says, a lot of this got edited out of the episode when it aired. The network made it seem like the girls weren't in the room and that the moms were, and they also cut out the part where Abby bribed Aubrey. They didn't even show me running out of the room crying and looking for my mom. Rather than show the incident in its entirety, the episode seemed to protect Abby and any sense of likability she had with the audience. Now, this is something that Nia said in the interview podcast that I was watching yesterday, is that the show actually protected Abby to make her more likable. That was the main thing that they did. The edits were to make sure the show didn't get canceled and that Abby seemed more likable. More likable. So this version that we were seeing on TV is the more likable version. So it goes on to read, usually when a kid cried, the producers were all over it. But since this was so malicious and vindictive, they had to protect their interests. This was the kind of thing that could have gotten the show canceled, or at least in really hot water. Now, that is because, would this not be considered like bribery and blackmail? I feel like it is legitimately illegal for Abby to ask Aubrey to not work with Nia for $10,000, but that, I'm not like a lawyer, I don't know. One of the hardest things to accept was that no one else seemed to care. None of my teammates nor their mothers were even bothered to check in on me after this. Well, Nia, if you're seeing this now, I hope that you know that all of the fan base has your back, and we've always had your back throughout the entire run of the show. Even when they didn't show everything on the show, we were rooting for you, even if you couldn't feel that from inside your suffocating, like, isolated existence. They'd all witnessed the worst day of my life firsthand, and no one did anything about it. Sometimes other moms would comfort the girls or speak words of encouragement to make them feel better when they were troubled. I got none of that. Instead, some of the other moms told us we'd brought the situation on ourselves and that we should have taken Abby up on her offer to manage me. Jill. Like, only Jill would say that. But also, can we talk about when Christy was on the show, Christy did comfort Nia. So I guess once Christy was gone off the show, but like, if there was anybody that would actually come around and comfort the kids, you can count on Christy. She was comforting Nia, she was comforting Kenzie, she would even comfort Maddie. So when people are saying that Christy was just like absolutely awful, not her whole thing was just like making sure Chloe won and she hated all of the other kids, like she did make Maddie cry. She's spoken about it multiple times. She's very sorry for it. But also, like, we saw firsthand her actually going out of her way to comfort children even when their parents weren't. So shout out to Christy for that. Then it says, that's when it sank in that I was alone in this dance mom's world. No one was coming to save me. Well, no one except my mom. It was now us against the world. Creating the mini Holly. Congratulations to Holly, because honestly, Nia is a stand-up human being. But I think that it is so important to take a look back on this, and this is probably why Nia was so excited when Chloe came back to finish off this season. Like, Abby just got worse and worse and worse, and especially after they moved to LA, and then her ego was so fucking high that she felt like she controlled everybody and that everybody was just a pawn in her game of life. Then it all came crashing down for her. I feel like Abby Lee Miller is like the most illustrative case of poetic justice that can ever happen in this world. Like, you were so diabolical to so many people, and you got your just desserts in so many ways. And now, still to this day, people are still holding you accountable for things that you did 15 years ago that you figured, well, I'm just gonna get away with everything scot-free because I'm a narcissist, I'm a grandiose narcissist, and I can do whatever I want, and there's gonna be no repercussions. Repercussions are only gonna be for people that are weaker than me, people that I have control over. Literally, this woman. Ugh. But if this didn't make you just for Abby Lee Miller even more than you already were before this, I don't know what to tell you. But this is where the chapter gets emotional, or at least for me. She basically talks about relearning who she is outside of the role she played for so long. Because when you're known for one thing as a kid, especially on reality TV, where that storyline is kind of fabricated for you, and it's not really a narrative that you've chosen for yourself or is necessarily real. Everyone else thinks that they've already decided who you are. And she had to unpack, who is she when no one else is telling her how to dance? Who is she without a storyline from the TV show? Who is she when she isn't balancing drama and expectations or public judgment? It's that feeling of, I've been performing for everyone else, but what if I get to write the script now? What if it's my turn to write my own narrative? What if it's my turn to be a star in my own life? And that's when I feel like Nia really started to mature and step into her own powers, when she found this wisdom for herself. So like by the end of the chapter, the energy has totally shifted. There's this new confidence. It's not like loud or dramatic, but steady, like grounded, quiet, earned confidence. It feels like she's finally stopped living in reaction to the chaos around her and started making choices that were actually hers, for her, from her own brain cells. Like, it's less about running from the past and more about reclaiming the version of herself that got her buried under years of pressure and expectations and conflict. So if I had to describe this chapter in one sentence, it would be, it's the moment after the storm when you walk around your life and realize what's still standing and how you're becoming now that the noise is completely gone. So that's when we get into chapter 8. Now, chapter 8 feels like that point in someone's life where everything is shifting, not in a chaotic way anymore, but like in a growing way. So it's the chapter where Nia steps into the next phase of her life, and you can tell she's finally getting to like this space to figure out who she actually is when the world isn't constantly pulling her in different directions anymore. Here's how it felt to me. Like, she was entering a new season of life. So this whole chapter has this energy of Nia like standing at the edge of something new, knowing she's not the same girl she used to be. Like the fear she felt in earlier chapters, like her early years at the ALDC, starts turning into this quiet confidence. Like she's finally choosing which direction to walk instead of being pushed into one, I guess. It's very like, I've survived the mess and now I get to build something for me, bitches. It's like the vibe. So, like rediscovering her voice. In chapter 8, Nia talks about her grandfather passing away and them moving to LA. Everybody starting at the ALDC LA and going to Australia for the Astro Awards, and how basically everything was just like completely different and their entire life was uprooted. One of the biggest things in this chapter is how she starts reclaiming her voice, like not just literally, but metaphorically as well. Like after spending years being talked over, directed, corrected, or molded into whatever the adults around her like needed to be, she finally starts speaking up with intention, like not to start fights, not to defend herself constantly, like and be defensive, but because she's learning her voice actually carries weight and she deserves to be heard. Kind of like the whole point of this book. But like, it feels like she's finally asking herself, what do I want to say? What do I care about? What are my boundaries now? Like, what are my beliefs and values? And like opportunities that actually fit her start coming her way at this point, which is cool because that's just kind of how the universe works sometimes. What's cool about this chapter is that she starts taking on opportunities that feel like perfectly aligned with who she is growing into. Like not what people expect her to be because of the TV show that she did as a kid, but she steps into projects where people see her potential. She gets to express herself creatively. She's treated with respect. And she actually feels excited instead of pressured. It's less about chasing fame and more about doing things that feel authentic. This is the chapter where she starts realizing she's allowed to evolve. There's this like undercurrent throughout the whole chapter about self-trust. When you grow up with cameras on you and adults judging you and viewers commenting on your every move, it's hard to know if a decision is yours or if it's something you're doing out of habit. In this chapter, she finally begins trusting her own instincts instead of like running on autopilot. She starts trusting her taste, trusting her judgment, trusting her perception of people, and like trusting that intuition, like her gut response, her gut instinct, and like trusting that she knows what's good for her. It's like she's rebuilding the foundation of who she is, like one brick at a time. And there's also like healing going on in the background. The chapter doesn't present healing as like this dramatic emotional breakthrough moment. Instead, it's like this kind of quiet healing that's just happening slowly in the background as she's growing and maturing through like little choices that you see, like not reacting the way she used to, giving herself grace, forgiving herself for not knowing better back when she was a kid, or like rebuilding that confidence that had been chipped away. It's subtle, but it's powerful. Like, we all saw how happy and excited Nia was in the beginning of Dance Moms compared to like how she says you could even see her losing that spark on the show, and I feel like all of the girls did. But I was watching her interview with Trisha Paytas today, and that's what they were talking about, and I feel like you saw that in all of the girls. It's like, yay, I'm so excited to perform, and now it's a job. I can relate to that as well, being somebody that started in musical theater and performing as a hobby, and then it just one day was like all of a sudden work. But anyways, it's time for a new relationship with fame for Nia. Another theme here is like her shifting perspective on fame. She's no longer trying to live up to a persona. She's not chasing virality or attention. Instead, she's like genuinely figuring out how to navigate privacy, boundaries, her own mental health, and staying connected to real life. She's basically learning how to be Nia the person, not Nia the character people think that they know. The energy of the ending of this chapter, there's like this hopeful, grounded vibe for her, like the kind that you feel when you finally close an old book and start a new one. The chaos is behind her, the confusion is settling, the opportunities ahead are more clear because she now like understands who she is and why she's doing what she's doing, and she's ready for the first time, like to build a life that actually reflects who she is becoming and not what she's just being told to do and marketed to do. If I had to sum up the entire chapter in one sentence, it would be, it's the chapter where she stops surviving and finally starts living on her own terms. And then moving on to chapter 9, it felt like the moment where everything in Nia's life is finally starting to expand outwards, not in the chaotic way of the earlier chapters, but like this one had a calmer, big world opening up energy, like, Mama, I'm a big girl now. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. It's like she's stepping into the next phase of her life, but this time she actually gets to decide what that looks like. It almost reads like she's walking out of a long hallway, and then suddenly there are multiple doors for her to choose from, and none of them are being forced on her. Now, chapter 9 is interesting because she talks a lot about her relationships that she had with all of the OGs and all of the girls. So in one excerpt from chapter 9, she says, "In telling my story, I don't want to come across as if I'm throwing any of the girls under the bus. I'm only speaking about my experience, my perspective. As with any sisterhood, friendship, or relationship, there will always be ups and downs. At the end of it all, the strength of a relationship is about how you overcome those hardships and move past them. In some cases, you may come out even stronger than you were in the beginning. That's how it was with me and the OG cast. Maddie, Kenzie, Paige, Chloe, and Brooke. We always had respect for one another and never badmouthed one another publicly or aired out anyone's dirty laundry. Sure, there were moments when we'd each be closer to one person over the other, but we all had a special bond due to our shared experience on a national TV show and dealing with Abby. Most of us spent more than a decade with one another. Starting with some of us, we were as young as 3 years old through to our teenage years. Sometimes we did fight, but there was a lot of love among us. Though not all future cast members would go on to be respectful of the other dancers when they reflected on their experiences, the OG cast was never kind or malicious. I can wholeheartedly say those girls are amazing. Truly some of the most down-to-earth and kind people I know. So this chapter had like this subtle but powerful shift. Nia isn't operating from survival mode anymore. It's not about putting out fires or managing other people's emotions. Instead, the focus turns inward, like she's figuring out who she is at this point in her life and what she genuinely wants next. It feels like she's finally taking a breath after years of constantly reacting to everything around her, realizing how much she's grown. One of the strongest vibes in the chapter is her noticing her own maturity. She starts looking at her own decisions, her friendships, her opportunities, and realizing, oh, you know what, I've changed, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Instead of struggling to justify her choices or fearing she'd disappoint people, she's more grounded and self-aware at this point. Like, she's not trying to shrink herself for anyone. She's not apologizing for wanting more out of life. It's the kind of chapter where you can feel her stepping into adulthood, but like in a soft, confident way, not forced, not rushed, just naturally evolving at her own pace. And the opportunities at this point in her life were definitely reflecting that growth, because what really shows her evolution is how she approaches her career in this chapter. She's finally getting opportunities that align with who she actually is and not what people expect her to be, because she's set out those intentions. Like, she's meeting people who respect her, that value her contributions, and see her beyond her childhood identity. Instead of taking whatever's thrown at her, she's being intentional, like choosing things that feel right, even if they require risk or stepping outside of her comfort zone. It's not about chasing fame anymore. It's about building something that's real and impactful and that's coming from like a real intention. And also like letting go of old labels. A big part of this chapter is her realizing she doesn't have to carry every label that was put on her when she was younger. She's not stuck being the quiet one or the underdog or the girl who never got enough credit. She isn't boxed into the version of herself that she was on TV as a literal child. This chapter is very much about her closing the door on all of those old narratives and just moving forward with her own narrative from her own intention. Like, it reads like she's finally making peace with who she used to be and what people know her for, and acknowledging her past without letting it define her future. It's obviously going to have an impact. Like, she was obviously on Dance Moms. People are always going to recognize her for that and like all of that comes along with it. But like, she's closing the door on letting that define her. And then she's like stepping into her own self-worth now as a woman. Like, the emotional core of the chapter was all about self-worth. You can almost like feel the click, which is funny because like on the show they would always say, one day it's going to click for Nia. Like, Abby would say that and Holly, but this is where it finally clicked in her mind, where like she realizes she doesn't have to beg for respect or validation anymore because she's earned her place. She's built her foundation. She's confident in her abilities, even the ones that she used to question. Like, it's not a loud confidence. It's not like arrogant or cocky. It's not defensive confidence. It's like that quiet, steady, I know who I am now kind of confidence. The vibe by the end of the chapter, it feels like she's standing at the start of a brand new journey. We were strangers starting out on a journey. Not afraid, not confused, just ready. Like, she's learned from her past, she's proud of how far she's come, and she's also finally looking ahead with clarity instead of fear. If I had to describe chapter 9 in one sentence, I'd say it's the turning point where she officially moves from who she was expected to be into who she's choosing to become. Which, that brings us to chapter 10. Which, like, you know what? This is a totally full circle moment. And it feels about the right point in the book for it to be a full circle moment. The right point in Nia's journey. In chapter 10, it's pretty much all about her relationships with all of the girls and how they were like sisters, how they had their ups and downs. She always felt, or often felt, excluded. She talks about the different dynamic of being a different race than the other girls, and getting her puppy Henry for her 11th birthday that all of the girls chipped in to get her. An excerpt from this chapter says, "Just as I felt like a backup dancer in Abby's eyes, I started to feel like a backup friend. I wasn't automatically included in get-togethers, sleepovers, and concerts, and I noticed that invitations were extended only when someone else wasn't available, or perhaps when two of the girls were getting on each other's nerves. I wasn't the first choice friend for anyone except Kenzie, and I couldn't understand why. I now believe that racial differences made it difficult for the other girls to fully understand me. Sometimes this showed up in little ways, like when they wanted to go swimming and I had to tell them I couldn't get my hair wet and would need to sit out." She also goes on to say, "Maddie had always been Abby's favorite, which meant a lot of the girls wanted to be close to her. When we became adolescents, the friendships turned into cliques, and that hurt. I think that if Abby had said I was a good dancer, the girls would have wanted to get closer to me as well. Once Chloe left, I really felt alone. At times, I felt like I was fighting for my life without a single friend to hang out with. I don't hold any animosity towards the girls. It wasn't their fault how things went down. Every one of us has been through so much. Still, the years of social isolation were extremely painful to go through. But I'm grateful for the hard lesson they taught me. That I needed to love myself and be my own biggest fan. I worked to develop the mindset that if someone didn't invite me somewhere, it was their loss. Nia says in the book, I've kept great relationships with my OG girls. I have such amazing memories with them, even post-dance moms, like Maddie doing my makeup for prom and piercing the second holes in my ears for my 18th birthday. Chloe and I have been able to spend so much time together, going to our favorite restaurants and getting to be teenagers and college students together. I'll never forget her treating my mother and me to high tea at the Plaza Hotel for her birthday and Mother's Day. I love celebrating Kenzie's birthday each year, and I was thrilled to go to her concert when she went on tour. I cherish the impromptu get-togethers with Paige and Brooke when I'm home in Pittsburgh. Running into the Highland sisters and their brother Josh at a bar in Lawrenceville after Brooke got engaged was such a surreal and special moment. After everything we've went through, we've all made it out as well-adjusted adults. We may go years without talking to one another because life gets in the way, but something always happens to push us together again, and we connect like no time has passed. The shared understanding, love, and respect us OG dancers have for one another is beautiful. Even our moms have been cordial and kept in touch. After all, they went through just as much as we did. Chapter 10 feels like the chapter where everything she's gone through, like all the pressure, all the conflict, all the growth that comes with that, finally connects and everything clicks, like we were saying in the last chapter. It's not like a dramatic, explosive chapter. It's more reflective. It's another more emotional chapter, like all the ones that I've included in this one video, because these were all more like emotional, reflective chapters about growth and change, because this was a very like transitional period for her. That's why I've included it all in one video. But it's the chapter where she finally gets to look at her own life and say, like, I know who I am now, and you know what? I'm okay with it. It reads like the final deep breath before stepping into like your next era. But reflecting on that journey, like right from the beginning of the chapter, you can feel her looking back with a clear perspective, like not the painful, confused lens she had as a kid, not the defensive lens she had during the chaos, but like a balanced, grown, grounded point of view, which is also why she said she wanted to wait this long to write the book, because she was like, I didn't want to write the book earlier because I figured that I would just be like angry and retaliating and defensive throughout the entire book. So she at least had the insight when she was younger to be like, I want this to come from a more neutral, grown place, so I'm going to wait. And so she did. But in this chapter, like, she's finally able to see what shaped her, what taught her, what wounded her, and what out of that strengthened her. And she's not bitter about it. She's not pretending it was all fine either. She's just, like, she understands it now, and she's processed it, I guess you could say. And that's the tone of the whole chapter, like, clarity. There's this very emotional thread throughout chapter 10 about healing, and it's not about obvious wounds, but like the subtle wounds, the wounds that you don't notice until years later, like she was mentioning earlier in the book. It's things like the pressure to be perfect, the way adults' expectations sit on your shoulders, or like the constant need to prove yourself, especially when you've grown up in an environment where it was not only the subtext, but also like you're being told every day, you need to prove yourself, you need to be better. And there's also like the self-doubt that came from being compared to the other people on the team and just compared to everyone because she's a public figure, and like the quiet hurt that she learned to hide because she had to just be the good girl and like put on a happy face for everybody, especially because she had so many fans that looked up to her and she had to be a role model. So like this chapter is her acknowledging those softer, quieter scars. She finally like allows herself to feel sadness for the younger version of herself, the girl who was doing her best without understanding why everything felt so heavy all the time. And she honors that little baby Nia now. A big part of chapter 10 is also Nia reclaiming her narrative. So I would say like it's like her taking back her own story. For so long, other people wrote her story for her, edited it for drama, for TV, interpreted her actions however they wanted to because they don't know her, so they have no idea what her intentions were. They decided how she should be seen. They talked over her truth. And now in this chapter, she gets to say, this is who I am, this is what actually mattered, and this is the real story. from the, what is that saying? From the something's mouth? I don't know. I don't remember. If you know what saying I'm trying to say, let me know down in the comments below. But it's empowering, this chapter. It's like empowering without being aggressive. It's her reclaiming her identity gently, confidently, after years of being spoken for and spoken over. It's like strength in the softness of life. So something beautiful about this chapter is how she doesn't try to pretend she's some unbreakable warrior. She embraces her softness, her sensitivity, her empathy. Instead of seeing these traits as weaknesses or as things that made her an easy target, she realizes they're actually some of her greatest strengths and gifts. She's learned that being calm, kind, and steady in a chaotic environment isn't a weakness, it's actually resilience, and it's definitely a skill set that she can use moving forward. This chapter really highlights that shift in like self-perception. And then I also feel like this chapter really highlighted like gratitude instead of resentment, like being grateful where you came from instead of just like holding grudges. Like I feel like a lot of people that have been reading this book or commenting about it online have been saying like it's really like vengeful or spiteful, and she's just like pulling up all this stuff to stir up drama. But like I was also listening again on her podcast with Trish, and she's like talks about how it's more about honoring young Nia, and that's how I see it as well. Like this is her story. She has the right to tell the story and include details even if they don't make other people look so good. It's her telling the truth and her truth. But anyways, what surprised me is how much gratitude shows up in this chapter, and like how much gratitude she has in general after being through this hellish nightmare experience of being on Dance Moms. But it's not like toxic positivity either. It's not pretending everything was great, but like real mature appreciation. She acknowledges the people who supported her on the journey, the lessons that she needed to learn that she learned from this journey, the opportunities that she earned from this journey, and like the growth that came from the hardship. And she's not defined by what hurt her, but she's defined by how she rose above it and how she chose to act and respond to what was going on in her environment. The whole chapter has like this peaceful vibe, like she's finally made peace with her past instead of fighting it. And it's also about like stepping into her own future. So as we're getting towards the end of chapter 10, it feels like we're starting to talk about like the future in kind of an aspirational way, like not in a dreamy childlike way, but like in a very focused, grounded way. Nia's finally ready to move forward without like dragging all of her old baggage behind her. She's not trying to escape where she came from. She's simply like not letting it limit her anymore. Now she's choosing the project she wants, the people she trusts, the energy that she allows near her, the goals she actually cares about, the life she wants to build. And she's doing it with like this sense of calm confidence we haven't seen so far in the book. Like it's like her saying, I survived all of that, now I get to live, bitches. I don't know. Chapter 10 kind of feels like a closing chapter of your diary, knowing you'll never write from that place again. It's like closure, but in a soft way. If I had to summarize this chapter, I'd say it's like the chapter where she finally sees herself fully. Like here's the past Nia, the present Nia, the future Nia, and accepts all versions with compassion. I'm happy that Nia finally has the strength to share her story and be vulnerable and get things out there in her own words.
This routine is based on a movie entitled The Help.
Nia has to convey the voice of people who didn't have a voice at that time. And I think that's an enormous weight for Nia to have on her shoulders.
5, 6, Nia.
In these chapters, we're going to be talking about Nia's last seasons at the ALDC and on Dance Moms, and her talking about at what point she decided that she really wanted to leave the show. We're also going to be talking about the time when she felt the most excluded and like counted out by Maddie. And we're also going to be talking about the time that she felt like Abby Lee Miller was the most racist to her. So chapter 11 of Nia Sue's memoir is titled Mothers and Daughters. It's one of the most revealing chapters in the entire book. It focuses on Nia's relationship with her mother, Dr. Holly. And it shows how critical Holly was in helping Nia survive the emotional chaos of Dance Moms. The chapter opens up with Nia saying, "No matter how difficult things got on set, my mom was my rock through it all." That one line sets the tone. The entire chapter is about love, protection, and resilience. Nia and Holly were best friends before the fame. Nia describes her early childhood as being deeply intertwined with her mom. They did everything together, like shopping trips, getting their hair and nails done, going to the movies, spending day-to-day time together. And because Nia didn't have many close friends at school, she hung out with her mom constantly. Their bond wasn't created by the show, it was already strong. And Dance Moms only made it stronger because they had to endure so much side by side. On the road, Holly became every role Nia needed. When they traveled to Los Angeles for filming, Holly essentially became a one-woman support team. Nia lists every role her mother took on, including assistant, stylist, chauffeur, schedule manager, communicator, and an overall caretaker. Holly was driving Nia to acting classes, workouts, voice lessons, training lessons, and everything. She kept Nia's off-set commitments organized and running smoothly. People often mistook Holly for Nia's manager for that reason, but Nia explains clearly. Holly refused to manage her own daughter. They had talked about it early in Nia's career and agreed that Holly's role would remain mom, not manager. Holly refused to let showbiz corrupt their relationship. Nia writes in the book that she personally saw how the entertainment industry could tear families apart. Holly was determined not to let that happen to them. Nia says, "She kept my best interests at heart and never allowed money to get in the way of our relationship." This becomes especially meaningful later when Nia talks about how some people online accuse Holly of being a bad mom or exploiting her daughter. Nia shuts those accusations down. But it wasn't until after the show ended that Nia realized just how rare their bond really was. Like, she explains that some of the other girls on the show had good relationships with their moms, but they weren't like hang out together close. And that's normal for teenagers. But Nia emphasizes in the book, "My parents, specifically my mom, are my people." She also calls Holly her Wonder Woman, amazed at how her mother could multitask, support her, and still treat people with kindness, while also never letting people forget she's from the Bronx. Holly supported Nia without controlling her career. Nia calls Holly her #1 fan and biggest supporter. Even when Holly doubted that they'd get on Dance Moms because they were too boring, she was being realistic, not negative. Nia explains that Holly let her make her own career decisions, that Holly supported her even when those decisions weren't perfect, and most importantly, Holly never took a cent of Nia's money. Nia says explicitly, "My trauma was not caused by my parents." She's firm about that. The emotional damage she talks about throughout the book comes from circumstances of the show, not from her home life. Nia goes into detail about how she was excluded from like the whole Todrick Hall filming thing. And it's one of the most emotional moments in the chapter, I think. But basically, there is Todrick Hall and another well-known YouTuber that came to the studio, but we'll get into the second one later. But anyways, so here's the full story. After filming in LA, Nia asked the other girls if they wanted to hang out, and they said that they had no plans. So Nia ran an errand and told them to text her if something came up. And then when no one messaged her, she and her mom went out for a relaxing evening, shopping, dinner, walking around. And when they returned to the hotel, Nia checked her phone and saw social media posts from the girls and Abby hanging out with 2 YouTubers, a popular female YouTuber and Todrick Hall. This event was clearly planned and she wasn't invited. Nia was devastated. She called her dad sobbing and cried herself to sleep. Holly cried too, feeling helpless. This moment is one of the most painful examples of exclusion Nia shares in the entire book. Now, this is where I have to call Nia out because this was kind of weird, honestly. She just mentions Todrick Hall, and then throughout the entire chapter, I'm waiting for her to name drop who this popular female YouTuber is because she just keeps saying popular female YouTuber throughout the chapter. But she's talking about Colleen Ballinger. She's talking about Miranda Sings. Like, this is already public. They've already talked about it publicly. It's in interviews. So I'm not understanding why she's mentioning everybody else by name in this book. Like, Abby is a freaking child pred, in my opinion, and we're naming her and talking all about her throughout the book. So I'm like, why are we not even mentioning Colleen Ballinger by name? Like, I understand she's currently canceled, but to like be evasive of even mentioning her name seems weird to me, especially when it's already public information who it was. Anyways, The event was clearly planned, and she was not invited to come meet Miranda Sings in Todrick Hall, is the overlying theme here. But Holly confronts Abby and the moms at the studio the next day. So Holly was like done being silent at this point. She marched into the studio and confronted Abby and the other moms directly, and she said, "You all blatantly lied to our faces and said you weren't hanging out, and then we go online and see all of you." She explained how much it hurt Nia and that Nia cried herself to sleep. Instead of apologizing, the others defended themselves and acted confused about why it was wrong. Nia remembers being shocked at their reaction. Holly explained how much it hurt Nia and that Nia cried herself to sleep that night. Instead of apologizing, the others defended themselves and acted confused about why it was wrong. Nia remembers being shocked at their reaction. Months later, Todrick and the mystery YouTuber Colleen Ballinger apologized. When the episode finally aired, the YouTuber saw what happened and reached out to Nia, saying she had no idea she'd been excluded and felt terrible. Todrick Hall also apologized. He hadn't been informed and didn't know why Nia wasn't invited. And this whole event, Nia just chooses to be the bigger person. Even though Abby intentionally left her out, Nia says she had the chance to be different. So she invited JoJo to go with her when Colleen Ballinger wanted to meet up again. JoJo was also a new girl on the team, and at that point had been left out of things as well. So they, along with their moms, had a lovely dinner that helped heal the situation. Nia says this moment is one of the core events that deepened her friendship with JoJo. After the painful story about being excluded from the, quote, YouTuber hangout, Nia moves into another major moment where Holly stepped in and made things right. The Taylor Swift 1989 World Tour incident. I didn't get to go on this tour. I'm still jealous of everyone that did. I have friends that went to this tour like 40 times, and I'm not exaggerating. They went to like 40 different cities, and like in Toronto, they went like every single different night. I think it was here like 4 nights or 8 nights or something like that. And I'm just like, I literally asked outright, how did you get all of these tickets? Did you buy these? And they wouldn't tell me. So I'm like, something shady's going on here because I didn't even get one ticket. Anyways, getting back into the story, still don't understand why, other than Colleen being canceled, that she doesn't mention her by name. It doesn't make sense to me, especially if you're going to mention her multiple times throughout the chapter. But anyways, let's talk about the Taylor Swift concert and what she talks about that in this chapter. So Nia was about 13 or 14 years old when Taylor Swift's 1989 World Tour came to Pittsburgh. And like the other girls, she was a massive fan and really wanted to go. But this is where things took a painful turn, because Maddie Ziegler had connections through Sia, and she was able to get a special concert tickets and a backstage access. And Maddie invited Kenzie Ziegler, Kendall Vertes, and Kendall's older sister. And not Nia, even though Nia was one of the 4 Pittsburgh-based girls. So I'm like, okay, fair enough. I understand why that would hurt at 13, 14 years old. Nia emphasizes this detail. She was literally the only Pittsburgh-based Dance Moms girl who was not invited. She even says she would have gladly paid for her own ticket if anyone had bothered to ask. To make the situation worse, in the days leading up to the concert, the girls talked openly in front of her about what they would wear, how they'd style their hair, what time they'd meet, and all of the details of their night. Each conversation made the exclusion feel worse. Seeing her daughter upset, Holly stepped in. She surprised Nia with tickets so she could attend too. Nia and her mom went to the show and had an amazing time, even though she didn't get backstage access like the others. And I'm like, this does feel like a little bit intentional, to be completely honest. I'm always the first one to step in and be like, I don't think the girls were intentionally bullying anybody, or they were just kids and whatnot. But this kind of thing definitely happened to me in elementary school, probably younger than 13 or 14. But kids did that on purpose. And I can't imagine why Nia would be the only person not invited and that they would talk about it in front of her repeatedly without wanting to do that intentionally. Okay, to correct myself, I was just having like a brain aneurysm. It's the 1989 tour, not the Eras tour. Not that I got to see either of them, but like it was the Eras tour where she had like 8 performances or 4 performances or something in Toronto. But I was like, how was she 13 at the Eras tour? Didn't that just happen? But it was the 1989 tour. So that tracks. That makes a lot more sense. Nia writes in the book, I didn't get to go backstage and meet Taylor Swift like the others, but I did have an awesome mom who would do anything to make me feel seen and appreciated. Nia explains that these weren't isolated incidents. Being treated differently happened constantly in big and small ways. She reflects on the period where the girls participated in meet and greets all over the country. These events were mostly fun, but also ripe for favoritism and exclusion. So at one meet and greet, a fan approached the table with gifts for every girl except Nia. And these weren't small gifts, they were personalized snow globes featuring a little Yorkie with a pink bow, each girl's name engraved on it. Nia's family actually owned a Yorkie at home, so she thought the snow globes were adorable and fully expected one to be handed to her too, but she wasn't given anything. She stood there smiling, waiting, acting friendly, while being the only girl left out. She stood there smiling, waiting, acting friendly, while being the only girl left out. She describes feeling awkward and deeply hurt, especially as a young child. But Holly stepped in once again. She found the exact snow globe online and had one made for Nia, which Nia still keeps in her room today. She even wonders if the other girls kept theirs. Nia explains that she didn't mind when Abby later excluded her from meet and greets because the emotional toll had become too much. Fans would tell her to her face that another dancer was their favorite. The other girls would sell out their autograph photos while her stacks sat completely untouched. She was regularly cropped out of the photos. She was missing from a full promotional image for the show. She says it's validating that fans today notice these things because at the time the team laughed it off or told her she was being dramatic. The audience now sees what really happened, and Nia is honest about how painful it was. One of the most powerful parts of this section is when Nia directly addresses the racial element. And she says, some people can't stand confident young black girls. She states clearly that her mother is the reason she grew up confident and grounded. She didn't have close friends on the team to turn to, but she always had Holly. And she did have fans, many who were incredibly kind, whose letters and artwork she saved and deeply appreciated. Nia expresses guilt about how much her mother had to endure, both emotionally and socially, just to support her dreams. Holly did not want to be on the show. She tried to talk Nia out of auditioning, but she supported her daughter anyway. Nia acknowledges that it must have broken Holly's heart to watch her child be mistreated. Holly had to endure constant criticism directed at both Nia and herself. Holly had very little camaraderie with the other moms. The environment was like a constant competition for Abby's approval, and the mothers were often willing to say or do anything to stay in Abby's favor. The experience was isolating for Holly, too. And Nia describes seeing an old clip where Melissa is stressed out and venting to Jill, and Melissa says, Nia has privates. Does anyone ever say anything about that? And Jill replies, obviously Nia is no threat to anybody. And I'm just like, girl. Nia points out that Holly, although she wasn't present for this particular conversation, that this is the kind of thing Holly constantly had to hear. People always downplayed Nia to her. The moms were always taking shots. There was always unkind comments behind their backs, unfair assumptions about Nia's talent and value and her place on the team and whether she deserved to be there. And Holly had to withstand it repeatedly, not just Nia. Chapter 11 shifts into one of the most personal and heartbreaking points of Nia's story so far, and that's the impact that dance moms had on her, the rest of her family, especially her older brother, EJ. After everything she went through with the girls, the moms, Abby, the show, and the constant feeling of being excluded, Chapter 11 digs into the sacrifices that were happening behind the scenes and the ones that nobody ever saw so that Nia could be on the show. Nia explains that because she and her mom were constantly traveling for the show, sometimes for months at a time, her mom missed major moments in her brother EJ's life, like his prom, his school dances, his football and lacrosse games, and just normal teenage milestones that matter so much when you're growing up. And it's just at this point that I'm just like, where are the tell-all books from the siblings of the kids from Dance Moms? Because the kids from Dance Moms have the trauma from being on the show, but then in every other way, they're super privileged and wealthy, well-connected, amazing careers, great investments, products, whatever. The future is bright for them. But for their siblings, it's you had to lose your mom for majority of your childhood, and you didn't get those connections and those advantages that your siblings got from being on the show. So I would love to hear from the other siblings because we never do. Anyways, while the world saw like Dr. Holly every week on TV with Nia, EJ barely saw his mom at all. He had to share her with the cameras, the producers, and the fandom, while Nia got the majority of her attention because of the demands of the show and Holly being there every single day for filming. And this led to a rupture between Nia and her brother. Whenever family time did happen, EJ would snap at her. "You have mom all the time. Back off during my time." To Nia as a kid, it just felt like he was being mean or angry. What she didn't understand was that he was grieving the loss of their mother in real time. Season 6 was the worst of it. She and Dr. Holly were living in LA now for 4 to 5 months straight. EJ hated that everyone at his school knew his mom was the mom from TV, and meanwhile, he barely got to see her. He didn't want fame, he wanted a parent. Nia admits that at that age, she didn't have the emotional maturity to see his point of view. She was overwhelmed with her own pressures, dance, filming, being excluded, always fighting for respect, and she simply didn't understand how much EJ was hurting. I feel like this is very respectful and kind of her to include this empathetic chapter in her book. But just like most siblings, there was a turning point for them, and that was actually at the iHeartRadio Music Awards. So one of the most heartwarming stories in this chapter is when Nia finally gets invited to an awards show without the rest of the cast. This was huge for her. It meant the industry saw her individually, not just as like one of the Dance Moms kids, as like a clump. So she gets 1+1 to invite to this event. And because she wanted desperately to reconnect, she invites her brother EJ, and he actually says yes. And this becomes like a big emotional moment for her. It's like a chance for healing and to like reconcile with her brother. And they walk the red carpet together. EJ gets to see Nia's world from the inside for the first time, like the red carpet, the fans, the celebrities, like the Chainsmokers, Marshmello, Fifth Harmony, Shawn Mendes, Miley Cyrus, Meghan Trainor. Literally, like, everybody was there. And he got to see firsthand the chaos and the pressure of, like, being on when you're a performer and everybody's expecting you to just be on. And seeing this firsthand completely shifted her brother's perspective. And he realized that Nia wasn't just being dramatic. She really was under enormous pressure being, like, a celebrity at this age. And his sister was genuinely accomplishing something big. It didn't magically fix everything, but it broke down a wall so that they had more of like a common understanding now. And where they are today, she says, is that as adults, her and EJ have completely rebuilt their relationship. They're like best friends now. They hang out when she's home. They go to movies, lunch, games. He comes to visit her in LA. She even helped him pick out a ring for his girlfriend, and he was extremely supportive of her writing this book. But despite all this healing, Nia admits something very vulnerable. She still feels haunted by the guilt of taking her mother away from her brother. And honestly, I completely would too. Completely different dynamic in my family that I've talked about before, but like as siblings, me and my one brother were kept away from my mom for 7 years while my other brothers got to have her. So this is a similar dynamic, and for, I guess, the same amount of time. But she explains that it took everyone to keep their family running during this period in order for her and Holly to be on the show. Like her grandparents stepped in, nannies, family friends. Like we talked about that, I guess, a couple times throughout the book, that her granddad was always stepping in to help out, taking her to McDonald's and stuff. But everybody was working long hours. Her dad was working long hours and basically raising his 2 sons alone while Holly was out in LA with Nia. And while everyone thinks that they understand what it's like to be on a reality show, Nia points out that the unseen cost is the most enormous, and not just for the kid on camera, but for that entire family dynamic. The chapter closes by returning to the theme of exclusion and her mother's unconditional love. She revisits the Taylor Swift concert she was left out of, the meet and greets where fans have gifts to all girls except for her, the promotional images where she was literally cropped out, and how every time her mom stepped in to fill those emotional wounds. Whether it was buying her the exact same snow globe that she was left out of, or taking her out for dinner, creating new memories to replace the painful ones, her mother was her anchor, and she sums up her mom in 3 words: protector, nourisher, and inspiration. And she makes it very clear. Without her mother, she would not have made it through Dance Moms at all. She couldn't have just like been a kid dancer on the cast. The final lines of the chapter emphasize that even as an adult, her mom is still her best friend, she's still her confidant, and she's still the person that she most wants to spend time with. Nia ends the chapter with pure gratitude, recognizing that Holly's love is what gave her the strength to endure all of the bullshit, the favoritism, the exclusion, the racism, the pressure, everything that came along with being a reality TV star. So in chapter 12, Nia goes deep into one of her most like transformational periods of her Dance Mom's journey. So that's one thing about this book, is that it seems to like jump all over the place in terms of time. Like, it's not linear. She's not really like talking about her early days and then her Dance Mom's days and now her days as an adult. She'll be like, this is my time here, and then I moved on to be an adult, and then we're back at the ALDC again in chapter 12. Anyways, so this is the point where everything at the ALDC was like falling apart, and she had to build her entire dance identity again from the ground up. She starts by explaining how season 5 was basically the breaking point for her. Things at the ALDC were like bad. Abby was mentally checked out, routines were repetitive to the point of being copy and paste week after week, and the girls weren't even warming up properly anymore. And so because of that, their technique was actually declining, which is insane considering they were competing nationally every weekend. Nia says she felt labeled as the weak link, and she was sick of that narrative. So instead of just accepting the story the show wrote about her, she decided to change it for herself. And Nia explains that she realized her technique was plateauing, not because she didn't have talent, but because she wasn't getting the level of training she needed at the ALDC, so she made a major decision. Nia decided to put in her own training outside of the show, and when I say training, I mean training, honey. She was putting in hours on her days off. She did private lessons, Pilates, ballet classes, technique classes, nightly strength and flexibility routines for focusing on her legs and feet. She built a whole village of professional support, including Taddeo Arnold, who was her personal trainer. He helped keep her fit and in shape. She had Richard Elsey, who gave her weekly privates, focusing on like stamina, her flexibility, her turns, and her jumps. So basically like technique and flexibility. And then Kristen McQuaid, who supported her YouTube like dance concept videos, and she choreographed them, directed them, and she even helped fund some of them. Nia was literally doing the work no one on the show ever saw, and that was all behind the scenes. Sounds kind of like JoJo. JoJo was like crushing it behind the scenes even while she was on the show. But anyways, let's talk about Chloe and Maud Arnold, who I'd never heard about before this book. So let's just call this a turning point. So around this time, she met Chloe and Maud Arnold, who are like the tap dancing powerhouse sisters behind the Syncopated Ladies. They're a major deal in the tap world, which I was surprised because I'd never heard of them. And they cast her in their global Formation tap video. And this is one where dancers all over the world submitted clips dancing the same choreography, and everything was edited together. Nia performed with the sisters themselves, and they put her in the center of the trio. This was huge. The final video went viral and was even featured on Beyoncé's Facebook page. This was one of the first times Nia felt the world actually saw her talent. As she continued training outside the ALDC, she slowly began growing a little community in LA. She even became close friends with Ava Michelle, like Ava from Dance Moms, who was originally brought on to Dance Moms as her rival. They ended up in the same acting classes and realized they had tons in common, so they started hanging out whenever possible. Nia says this was the period where people finally began seeing her, not as the weak link, not as Abby described her, but as a dancer with real potential who had simply been overshadowed. Nia dives into several painful examples of times she was held back or set up to fail. Number one is in season 1 during the Lux music video audition. A record label needed a young dancer to play the child Lux that we remember seeing on the show, who was like a tall blonde girl. Nia, being a black girl, obviously wasn't a match, but instead of being honest, she had to audition anyway. The role went to Chloe, who fit the casting perfectly. It made Nia wonder when her opportunities would come. And then there was the Joffrey Ballet audition setup. Season 2 included auditions for a scholarship to the prestigious Joffrey Ballet School. I remember this one too. That's where everybody went in and was doing their tricks. The only dancer on the team truly equipped for an elite ballet intensive was Chloe. Yet Abby forced Nia to do a death drop and jazz tricks, which obviously made zero sense for a ballet audition. After the episode aired, fans roasted Nia online, but she had no choice. If Abby told you to jump, you jumped. Nia says she was able to laugh today about it, but that moment still haunts her. I actually just saw that clip today of her doing the death drop in the Joffrey audition. I saw that on TV again today. And then there is the Dance Moms magazine photo shoot. So they did like this schoolgirl themed shoot. Kendall was also just talking about this in a podcast. I think it was just called Dance Track Magazine, where Maddie was the teacher's pet, Kendall played the mean girl, and she won the contest, and Nia was the gymnast. Well, Nia knew immediately that her role wouldn't be the cover girl. Gymnast? Totally random. Not on theme. And then there's number 4, their season 5 headshot disaster, which I remember this one as well. A photographer came to shoot the headshots, and everyone got lots of time except Nia, who was last. And when it was finally her turn, Abby left early and told the photographer, "Don't spend much time on her. She's not going to be bookable." Nia was devastated, but her mom told her to ignore it, and in the end, her headshots turned out gorgeous. Fast forward to 2016, and Nia talks about when the people from 17 magazine came to the studio, and I guess Abby tried so hard to keep Nia off of the list, and she even attempted to talk to the magazine to, like, talk them out of choosing her, which I can't remember if we saw that on the show. I do remember her saying, like, that they should pick that they should pick, like, Maddie and Kendall and whatnot, but is that what we would expect of Abby? Absolutely. But the magazine ended up hand-picking Nia anyways. I remember them calling her, like, their mini Beyonce, and that everyone at the office calls her the mini Beyonce, if you guys remember that. But Nia says the entire shoot was magical, like, beautiful outfits, supportive crew, and she felt seen for the first time. This moment boosted her confidence massively, especially when she was the one hand-picked out of a group. But while in LA, Nia started posting more on her YouTube channel. She posted stretching videos, makeup tutorials, dance videos, behind the scenes content, and just like everyday life. This gave her total creative control for once, and fans were shocked in a good way. They saw a side of her the show never highlighted, that she was technically strong, she was a talented dancer, and people were confused why she wasn't given choreography like that on Dance Moms. She doubled down with more videos, higher production, more training. And I remember this as well because I remember Nia doing like a full back split on her YouTube channel. Like she was doing a full scorpion, full split, and a turn sequence. And I'm just like, where is this in any of her numbers on the show? Like she never had any of that. It's very weird. But her brother Will helped her edit everything, which made it even more special for her. And she also joined Musically before it was even TikTok. And she joined like early on and gained a huge following through like dances, skits, and cameos from like all the other girls on the show. Nia explains that Dance Moms is like a mini version of society, full of privilege, stereotypes, and power structures. Abby's opinions shaped the viewers' opinions. If Abby hyped a dancer, people hyped them. If Abby trashed a dancer, the audience followed suit. Nia became very aware of how edited narratives influence viewers, which is why her social media became a lifeline, a place where she could reclaim her own image. One of the worst moments came in season 6, episode 12. Abby lets Maddie and Bryn each choose partners for their trios. But there's 7 girls total. Someone was going to be left unchosen. It ended up being Nia. Maddie picked JoJo over her. Not because Nia was untalented, but because everyone had subconsciously absorbed Abby's messaging that Nia was the weak one, and that crushed her. I remember being crushed by that moment on the show. That was one of the top crushing moments, especially if you've ever been the person that's like the last person chose in Dodgeball. I've been there, so I felt it, but then Nia talks about working with Debbie Allen, and this is like one of the biggest highlights of chapter 12. When Abby suddenly decided she was quitting the show, likely tied to her legal issues and like heading off to prison, the girls filmed at the Debbie Allen Dance Academy. Debbie Allen, who's like a literal icon, choreographer to literal legends, award-winning actress, director, dancer, and Nia had actually known her since she was 10. Well, Nia and Kalani performed an African-inspired duet choreographed by Isha Francis and Aninda Marshall. After the performance, Abby made a racially charged comment saying Kalani looked more African than Nia. One of the most offensive things Nia says she's ever heard from Abby. Nia was shocked at first, but it made sense when Maddie and Mackenzie actually left the show. Maddie was doing Sia projects and had outgrown the show, really. Still, their departure hit hard. Nia was the last OG left after they left. She was exhausted, burned out, anxious, and longing for a normal teenage life. Then the twist. There was a surprise that changed everything for Nia, and it was that she booked an off-Broadway job. At the end of season 6, Nia is told to go into the den. Inside, a cake that says congratulations Nia awaits her. There's a laptop ready to play a video, cameras are rolling. Her manager plays a clip of the cast of Trip of Love, an off-Broadway musical, saying they can't wait to work with her. It was a direct booking, no audition. Nia bursts into tears. Even Abby hugs her. Nia moved to New York for the summer, living in Hell's Kitchen. She learned the entire musical in 2 weeks. Her debut performance sold out. She performed solos, duets, ensemble numbers, and worked with Broadway legend Darlene Love. The cast adored her energy while she was there. The quick changes, the precision, the custom-made Tony Award-winning costumes, everything was next level compared to the ALDC. She finally felt respected. This was the best summer of her life. Kalani, Ava Michelle, Kaylee Ware, and even Abby came to see her perform. After living a life where she was valued, paid fairly, and treated like a professional, she realized something deep. She finally saw a future outside the show, and she didn't want to go back to Dance Moms. There was a brighter, healthier, happier future outside of the show. She'd earned her Actors Equity card, becoming the only cast member with a professional theater credit at that level. She summarizes the entire lesson beautifully. She succeeded because she believed in herself, not because Abby believed in her. For the first time ever, she wanted to leave Dance Moms, and she finally felt confident enough to take control of her life. Okay, that is the end of chapter 12. Let's get into chapter 13, which is her saying goodbye. Okay, so moving into chapter 13, it's kind of like an emotional unraveling and kind of closure chapter. So it's where Nia goes from being the last OG on Dance Moms to finally understanding her worth outside of that world. And honestly, the chapter is packed with events, emotions, and behind the scenes truths that totally reframe what her exit actually looked like from the show. So let's walk through this entire chapter. So she has the thought, I don't think I can go back after she did her Broadway run in New York. And Nia starts the chapter by admitting something that she kept telling her mom over and over and over. After the summer that I just had, ooh, I got to sing, got to dance. I was treated kindly and respectfully. I felt good. I filmed my first movie in Texas, and I started in that off-Broadway show. And none of that was because of Abby, and I don't want to go back to Dance Moms. Those opportunities came from Nia's hustle, her own talent, and the connections she made herself. She realized something huge. She didn't need Dance Moms anymore. So when the network reached out to confirm season 7, Nia didn't care at all. And this is when they, like we mentioned earlier in the book, they had contract negotiations for each season to try and change some little things if there was something that they wanted to be changed, but she was just mentally checked out and completely done. She had her speech ready and even had a lawyer on standby to protect her had it come time that she was actually going to formally quit. But the second she was handed the contract, she hesitated because she only had 1 season left on her contract. She'd made it this far, and breaking it felt like a huge decision. It kind of feels like making it to your last year of college and then being like, I quit, which for me, I did. Well, I made it to my second year of college in a 3-year diploma program, and then I was like, I need to leave. But then I was like, I don't want to not finish that, so I ended up going back. So, I can understand that feeling, or it would be like making it to grade 12 and then not completing it and getting your diploma, but that's how she felt at this point. And after talking things through with her parents, they decided she would return only if the network increased her pay. And honestly, they agreed quickly because the other girls didn't get residuals and the network made millions from reruns, and they still are. So Nia got, whoever owns Dance Moms now, because it's literally plays 24 hours a day on multiple networks, but Nia got the raise that she deserved, but so did all the main girls. And Nia admits she was upset. She was the last OG left, and she felt that her longevity should have earned her more respect, but she let it go. Her focus was getting through the final season and closing that chapter of her life at the ALDC. When she walked back onto set for season 7, something was different. She had more confidence, clarity about her worth, a summer of real artistic validation behind her, and a whole new perspective on life. And honestly, like, when you're already emotionally checked out and you've already been working outside of the show and there's nothing invested in there anymore, that takes away Abby's power. It's like, okay, what power do you really have over me? You can't do shit because I don't even want to be here. You want to fire me? I quit. Like, it's just that kind of vibes is basically what she came into season 7 with. And she explains that she'd been homeschooled for years, but for season 7, she'd actually returned to school, and it was an all-girls Catholic school in Pittsburgh called Oakland Catholic because they were back in Pittsburgh for season 7. And it was like the sister school to Central Catholic, she says, where her brothers went. And her older brother EJ was a senior, and her younger brother Will was a freshman at the same time she started high school. So she loved that the girls at her school knew her as Evan's little sister instead of Nia from Dance Moms. So it sounds like she kind of had like a bit of normalcy, I guess, by the end of high school, which sounds like it would be very refreshing. She was thriving academically, especially in math and science, despite filming constantly. And during the second part of season 7, Lorianne Gibson joined the cast as the new choreographer after Abby left. And Lorianne is a huge deal in like the dance world and the pop music world. And she choreographed for Michael Jackson, Alicia Keys, Lady Gaga, Beyonce. And she's been on Making the Band, So You Think You Can Dance, and like pretty much everything. But Lorianne immediately saw Nia's potential, and she gave Nia something she hadn't had in years: permission to feel. During Lorianne's first week, she literally lined the girls up and asked Nia directly, "What do you feel Abby has held you back from?" Nia explained that she'd been at ALDC longer than anyone and that Abby's harsh treatment felt personal, like Abby hated her and tried to crush her. Lorianne then asked how that made her feel. As Nia tried to answer with a fake smile plastered on her face, Nia's mom interrupted and said, "It's okay to show your emotions." And that was it. Nia cracked like an egg. She started crying hard. And this was on the show, if you remember this moment. But like years of pain coming up all at once. And she tried to hold it in, thinking all the things that Abby trained into them, like don't cry, suck it up, save your tears for the pillow, never let them see you break. But this time she couldn't escape. She couldn't run to the bathroom, and she just cried right there in front of everyone. Lorianne walked over and said, "No one has endured what I've endured, but it made me stronger. They said I couldn't, and I dominated. I'm not afraid of Abby Lee. She should be afraid of me." This was the beginning of Nia's healing. For the next 3 weeks, Nia cried constantly. Years of fear, stress, pain, loneliness, insecurity all began pouring out. Even the other girls were shocked because Nia had always been the strong, composed one. She realized she had been repressing everything for almost 7 years. Lorianne's presence taught her that emotion is strength, not weakness. She finally learned that it was okay to feel, to express, and to release. This is the point in the story where Cameron Bridges joins the team. So during Lorianne's second week, she choreographed a duet that was originally meant for Nia, but she decided to replace her with Cameron Bridges. And instead of being crushed, Nia actually supported it. She loved Cameron. They connected instantly because Cameron was also black, and Nia finally felt like she had someone on the team who understood her. Cameron's energy was different, vibrant, passionate, and Nia wasn't upset at all. Lorianne didn't insult Nia like Abby used to. She just said Cameron was a better fit for the choreography, and Nia honestly respected that. Nia explains that working with Lorianne, a successful black woman in the dance industry, meant everything to her. Lorianne gave constructive criticism without breaking her spirit. She never insulted her feat or her technique. She treated the girls with respect. She saw their potential. For the first time, Nia actually felt safe, seen, and reflected. She remembered what it felt like to relax and enjoy dance again. One of the most painful parts of the chapter is when Nia describes the horrifying way Abby treated Cameron. Abby constantly commented on Cameron's darker skin tone. At one point, Abby even told Cameron she was so dark she should paint the bottom of her feet because they were lighter and stood out. Nia was disgusted. Cameron didn't deserve that. She was talented, smart, passionate, and incredible to dance with. I've talked about this incident in one of my videos years and years and years ago, but I wasn't sure who else was in the room for that because Cameron spoke about it, but I've never heard any of the other girls talk about that moment until now. But I'm glad that Nia spoke up about it so that it validates what Cameron has been saying. Now, let's talk about the help dance controversy. At one competition, the team performed a routine based on the help. Nia and Cameron played the maids, while the other girls played the rich white socialites. At the end, Nia, rebelling in character, stepped away from her maid position. Even though the team won the dance, Nia still wound up at the bottom of the pyramid. Abby said it was because Nia's rebellious character didn't match the choreography, even though Abby assigned her that role. Meanwhile, Cameron was praised. Abby always made sure the narrative favored certain girls. They also worked with legendary choreographer Aisha Francis on The Last Dance. Aisha has danced with basically every major artist. The routine was empowering, but Abby still tried to tear it apart, insisting the choreography and costumes were inappropriate. The girls were around 15, 16 by then, and they'd worn similar costumes their entire lives. This wasn't about appropriateness, it was about Abby trying to keep control. By the end of season 7, Nia's Musically, or what we call TikTok now, was absolutely blowing up. She even landed a major Target partnership and traveled to Minneapolis to work with designers on a new children's clothing line. Then, while in Minneapolis, her mom got a call from the Dance Moms cast saying, "We're walking out." The moms were done with Abby's behavior and refused to return to the ALDC studio. Nia's mom said, "Absolutely." They never returned to the ALDC studio ever again. Even though they stopped rehearsing at ALDC, the girls still filmed until the end of the season. Nia's final solo, choreographed by Cheryl Burke and her assistant Ryan Ramirez, was titled I Need No One. It became one of her favorites. Cheryl respected them deeply and brought a whole different level of professionalism. And I just feel like this would have been such a stressful time for like everyone in the show because they went through so many different choreographers and teachers back to back because Abby was just like flew the coop and then went to prison. So there was nobody there. And I just feel like, or did she go to prison before the show ended? I can't remember if that was before season 7 ended or not, but like they had all these different teachers. They were going to all these different dance studios after at least having structure for the first 6 seasons. So I don't know. I feel like that would have been hectic. But this last episode, when Nia is like talking about the final episode of the show, so sad. It was an emotional chaos roller coaster for Nia, but like sounds like it was for everybody as well. She was relieved to finally be done with the ALDC, but she'd been done with that for a couple months before the show ended. And at this point, she's like, okay, I am ready for the show to just be done. But she was also sad to be leaving behind something that had been her entire childhood. And the producers kept saying, this might not be your last episode. You never know. But Nia knew. Her 7-year commitment was up. She was mentally and emotionally drained. She was ready to close that chapter. She performed her last solo and her last group routine. Both won first place. Bittersweet is an absolute understatement. When it ended, she broke down crying in the dressing room. Everyone hugged, they turned off their makeup lights, and they went home. And then there's life after Dance Moms and life after season 7. And if you can imagine, it was definitely an identity crisis time. Nia suddenly realized she didn't have a dance studio, a coach, a routine, a clear next step. She was relieved, but also completely lost. She didn't want to return to being just a normal girl from Pittsburgh. She didn't remember what that even felt like, but she also didn't want to be a backup dancer forever. She loved performing, but now she was on her own journey and she didn't know where she fit. For the first time in her life, she faced a massive empty space where Dance Moms used to be, and she had to figure out what came next, and that decision had to be her own. Chapter 13 is really all about reclaiming your identity, healing from years of emotional suppression, standing up for your worth, and finally being brave enough to walk away from something toxic, even if it means being completely lost afterwards. This is the chapter where Nia truly steps into adulthood, With fear, yes, but also with power. I am absolutely loving this book so far. I have learned a lot, but my one criticism, if I had to give a criticism for this book, is that a lot of her references, especially for her time at the ALDC, were things that we already saw on the show, and she goes through them in detail that we already saw on the show in the scenes. So I wish that there was some more like backstory. I wish that more of the things that she chose to talk about in the book were things that were stuff that we didn't see on TV at all instead of stuff that we already knew about. Otherwise, I've been loving this book. I've been super invested, and we are almost done. We've got chapter 14, 15, 16, and 17 left. All right, so now we're officially on to chapter 14, which is titled Dancing for Myself. When this chapter starts, Nia's in a really vulnerable, raw place. She's kind of like honest about something she'd never said out loud before, and she didn't look forward to dancing anymore. She was kind of like admitting it to herself for the first time, I guess. Imagine dedicating your entire childhood to something, pouring everything into perfecting your craft, only for it to become a source of anxiety instead of joy. And I can definitely relate to this as a dancer as well. That's where Nia was. She felt like no matter how much she improved, she would always be viewed through the lens of dance moms, the girl at the bottom of the pyramid. Even though she was posting beautiful dance videos on YouTube, not everyone who watched Dance Moms followed her there, and everyone in the dance world knew her, which sounds glamorous, but for her it meant fear. She couldn't just walk into a dance class like a normal teen. She worried people would secretly film her, judge her, try to catch her messing up so they could say Abby was right about her all along. So she stayed. Months passed. She didn't dance at all. She was terrified of underperforming, terrified of being humiliated again. Almost a decade of trauma will do that to a person. And then that grew into a fear of being seen in general. Nia explains how even now she gets nervous in every dance class she attends. She doesn't want to be filmed from the wrong angle or taken out of context, and it frustrates her because dance class is supposed to be a place where you mess up, experiment, and improve. But her body still remembered the pressure of perfectionism, the pressure Abby conditioned into her. But then something unexpected happened. Moms from the final season approached Nia and her mom about putting together a tour. The lineup would be Nia, Kalani, Kendall, and Chloe, who had returned in season 7. And this is what we called the Irreplaceables Tour. And they would travel the world performing new routines, doing meet and greets, and getting to show their talent outside the confines of the ALDC. Now, the idea itself sounded amazing, but the organization behind it was a complete mess. Their moms were told to coordinate everything, but the tour company thought they were in charge. Nothing was clear, and no contracts were signed because Nia's legal team kept flagging unanswered questions. And the final straw? Nia's brothers really didn't want their mom spending another year traveling nonstop. They'd finally gotten her home, so Nia and her family backed out. Then things got messy. Kira, Kalani's mom, sent an email threatening to sue Nia's mom. That fizzled out since there was no legal standing, but the emotional fallout didn't. Nia lost a friend she adored, Cameron. Cameron wasn't even invited to be a part of the tour, and Nia didn't know how to tell her it was being arranged behind the scenes. When the truth came out, Cameron was hurt, and Nia carried that guilt for years. That's when she really learned what real friendship looks like. Nia talks about how dance moms shaped her emotionally, and not in good ways. She grew up around adults who yelled, belittled, manipulated, and pitted kids against each other. So when the show finally ended, she didn't know what healthy relationships even looked like. She admits something really honest, and that's that she'd been conditioned to be a people pleaser. She constantly tried to make everyone happy, blend in, avoid conflict, be good. She didn't know how to read social cues because she had never had a normal social life. The show had consumed her entire childhood. Sometimes Abby didn't even remember why Nia was at the bottom of the pyramid. She was just used to putting her there. Nia internalized that and found herself drawn to people who drained her emotionally, people who loved her charisma but sucked the joy out of her. And that's when her mom stepped in. Again. And this is the point in her life where Nia starts taking therapy. And so this next section is all going to be about therapy, empathy, and narcissism. So her mom reached out to someone who'd helped them years before that was mentioned early in this book, and it's Stacy Kaiser, and she was the child therapist that was on the show. So Stacy listened as Nia explained what she'd been going through since leaving the show. She told Nia something no one had ever said to her before. "You're an empath." Suddenly, everything clicked. Nia remembered how she used to get genuinely upset when Abby screamed at anyone, not just her. She felt everyone's pain. But Stacy also taught her what a narcissist is. Someone who refuses to change, always flips the blame, and harms others emotionally. The description made Nia think of Abby. She even wondered why Stacy hadn't told her this earlier, but then she realized she was just a kid back then. That's exactly what I was thinking as well while reading this chapter, was like, why did nobody tell her this ever? Like, that was my first thought while watching season 1, episode 1 of the show is, oh, she reminds me exactly of somebody else in my life, and somebody else that is the head of my college program. And she also, two separate people, but that's something that I said in pretty much every video where I've ever talked about Abby, is she is a raging narcissist. But I'm like, this, I feel like, is information that people do need to know. But for me, when I'm dealing with a narcissist, I just think that it's like common knowledge when it, like, to other adults. But you'd be surprised how many people aren't aware of narcissism. They're not educated or versed on narcissism because they've never dealt with a narcissist in their life personally. But Abby definitely is one. She's a grandiose narcissist. She's not trying to hide that she's a narcissist at all. But yeah, I question, like, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. At what age do you think somebody is old enough to know about narcissism or to be educated that somebody in their life is a narcissist? Like, 12, 14, grown adult? Like, what are we thinking? I don't know. Let me know. Let's get back into it, though. She was too young to understand the emotional manipulation at that point, obviously, but their sessions with her and Stacy became life-changing. Stacy helped her understand boundaries, emotional energy, and how to protect herself from people who drained her. Nia realized she had been letting everyone else define her worth, and she couldn't live that way anymore. She started removing toxic people from her life, even when it hurt to do so. She began to choose herself. This was the beginning of her healing. Nia explains that writing this book was part of her healing journey. For years, she was too scared to tell her side, too worried about how people would perceive her. But therapy taught her she couldn't run from her truth anymore. She had to face it so she could move forward. She talks about how much work she had to do on herself once the show ended, work that took years, literal years. But little by little, she rebuilt her life with the help of family, therapy, and a lot of introspection. She realized this truth. If someone doesn't make you feel good about yourself, you distance yourself, even if they've been in your life forever. Nia learned to trust her gut, set boundaries, and stop bending over backward to make everyone else comfortable. About a year after leaving the show, Nia got a call from two women who had been huge inspirations to her, Chloe and Maud Arnold, the syncopated ladies that we mentioned earlier. They invited her to a dinner at Granville in LA. Nia was excited. These weren't just mentors, they were friends now. But Nia had a secret. She wasn't dancing anymore. Her confidence was gone. Abby's years of tearing her down had convinced her that she was washed up and unwanted. She had gone through a breakup, she'd quit dance entirely, and she didn't think she'd ever return. During dinner, they asked the question, "So, are you taking dance classes?" She told them no, she wasn't dancing. She didn't want to pursue being a professional dancer anymore. She wanted to focus on acting and music. She explained how Abby had tarnished her reputation and made her believe the dance world didn't want her. Chloe and Maud stared at her like she was speaking another language. They knew she had talent. They knew her heart. They knew she was a dancer at her core. They weren't judging her. They were shocked that the spark inside her had just been completely gone. They took action immediately. They set up private lessons for her with some of their instructor friends. Nia was scared, timid, and self-conscious. She felt like she had lost her spark, her confidence, her inner Sasha Fierce, but with each class, little by little, she started to feel better. She didn't post the videos she recorded during those sessions. She still wasn't ready, but for the first time in years, she was enjoying dance privately for herself. No cameras, no competitions, no pyramids, no Abby, just joy. By the end of the chapter, Nia expresses so much gratitude. If it weren't for people like Chloe and Maud, she truly believes she might have quit dance forever. They helped her reconnect with something she thought she had already lost. They helped her heal, they helped her rediscover who she really was, and they reminded her of something crucial. She was always a dancer. No one, not even Abby, could take that from her. And that's the end of chapter 14. The tone shifts again. You can feel this, it's like a big transition chapter. This is where Nia truly steps into her own life, like separate from Abby, separate from the ALDC, and separate from the world that defined her since she was a kid. She starts by explaining that sometimes the best things happen in the most unexpected ways. After leaving the show, she didn't have some grand master plan or strategy. She didn't sit down and say, I'm going to become an influencer. Not at all. She just started having fun with content creation. So, social media became the first place in her life where she could fully be herself. Without Abby's voice, without producers shaping her storyline, without being edited into someone else's narrative, it became her creative playground. And that freedom felt like a breath of fresh air after years of being constantly monitored, judged, and criticized. And then her platform exploded. From Dance Moms to the Olympics, honestly, this is like the rise of Nia Su online. Her following grew, her opportunities started pouring in musically, like we were saying before, started blowing up, and they invited her to be a social media correspondent, not just for them, but also for NBC. So at the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea, they wanted Nia Su. Imagine being a teenager and suddenly you're covering the Olympics. That's the level that she was operating at. Then she worked with the Tourism Board of Australia. She traveled to the UK for Just Dance Live. She was suddenly sitting on panels, speaking publicly, collaborating with major brands, and this was all after Dance Moms. She had promised herself she wouldn't be a one-hit wonder whose career ended when the show did, and she meant it. She used social media to leverage every opportunity. She knew she had more to offer than Abby ever gave her credit for, and now the world was discovering that with their own eyes. Because she was traveling back and forth so much, Nia began doing virtual school through the PA Cyber School. It gave her flexibility and the ability to chase opportunities outside of Pittsburgh. Her dream at this point, basically to move to LA permanently, but when she told her dad, he hit her with the realest reality check ever. If you get a job, you can move to LA. We just can't afford to move you there. It wasn't said harshly, he was just being honest. Nia was 16. She couldn't support herself yet, and he knew how unpredictable acting was, but she didn't hear hesitation. She heard, get a job, then go. And she took that and ran with it. She decided, okay, it's game time. Not long after signing with United Talent Agency, a major Hollywood agency, she was sent on an audition for the iconic CBS soap opera The Bold and the Beautiful. She auditioned, she booked it, and suddenly she was playing Emma Barber, a fashion intern with real storylines and real depth. This was huge. She went from being known as the girl at the bottom of the pyramid to being a network actress. Her family was overjoyed, and because the show filmed in LA, she finally got her apartment, something she and her dad had talked about. At 16 years old, she was living her dream, and she became a series regular, even though she originally had only been cast for a guest appearance. The experience transformed her. She learned how to memorize scripts in days, film 2 episodes a day, get into character quickly, and handle the pressures of a professional set. She compared it to dance. It was fast-paced, demanding, constantly learning, but in a way that felt like uplifting instead of toxic. In this chapter, Nia also goes into like the behind-the-scenes realities of acting. Nia goes into every detail about what it was like to do things she's never done before, like her first on-screen kiss. She makes it clear it was nothing romantic. Everything was professional, mechanical, and handled with so much respect. Her co-star was gentle and made sure she always felt comfortable. Holding a kiss for long periods was hilarious, not intimate. She had to stare into the distance until the camera cut, all the classic soap opera tricks. She also developed real friendships on set, particularly with Male Brady, Wayne Brady's daughter, who played her best friend on the show. But the biggest milestone is that Nia got a pre-nomination for a Daytime Emmy. She didn't even realize she was eligible at first, but there she was, a teenager working on a show with Emmy winners and being recognized for her performances. She felt like she was stepping toward EGOT territory. Emma was her character on the soap opera, and at one point it was time for her to die. Her time on the show came to an abrupt end when her character was killed off. Emma's final scene was shocking and dramatic, driving off a cliff after uncovering a huge secret. The whole thing caused a spike in viewership, and people still talk about that storyline. Even during a trip to Australia, fans recognized her not just from Dance Moms, but from The Bold and the Beautiful. She had truly made her mark. And like she jokes, since no one ever actually dies permanently in a soap opera, who knows? Maybe one day she'll return as Emma's evil twin. After the show, Nia found herself completely open-ended. She didn't have a full-time gig, so she split her time between Pittsburgh and LA, reconnected with family, and let herself be a teenager again. But she had the same voice in her head that she had during Dance Moms. You're not good enough. She kept dancing for herself, but didn't know where she felt career-wise. College became a looming question. She researched schools and kept asking herself, like, should I go to college even? Should I just skip straight to career? Like, I've already been working since I was like 9. What about acting, music, dance? Will college help me, or is it just going to hold me back? She felt completely overwhelmed, lost, and unsure, which I feel like is completely normal for people at that age. But that's when we get to the point where she starts talking about the Reach Higher program and meeting Michelle Obama's team, which it's ironic because people have been saying that Holly is like a carbon copy of Michelle Obama since the beginning of Dance Moms. But a man named Todd Krim reached out to her about a volunteer opportunity for the Reach Higher program, the college initiative launched by Michelle Obama. And she had done an event on UCLA campuses the previous year and loved the energy. Through Reach Higher, she also got connected to When We All Vote, another organization founded by Michelle Obama, and it's focused on voter advocacy. These experiences opened her world. It showed her the value of using her platform for more than entertainment, for community and change. After visiting UCLA again, she finally felt it. I see myself here. So she applied, but discovered later she had missed the date by 1 day. Still, she hoped for the best. Meanwhile, she moved into a new apartment in LA with a roommate just before the pandemic hit. Everything shut down, work dried up, and she returned to Pittsburgh. And that downtime ended up being exactly what she needed: family time, peace, clarity, and emotional healing. One night at dinner, her mom casually asked, "Did UCLA ever email you?" Nia checked her inbox. There it was, a message from UCLA. She opened it, scanned it, looked up, and said, "I think I got in." Her brothers screamed. Her mom confirmed it. "You got in." Everyone was so proud. Her brother EJ had even researched UCLA's acceptance rate, only about 9%, so he knew how big of an achievement. And Nia's entire family was just ecstatic for her. Her nana didn't even give her a choice. "You're going." They celebrated with a UCLA t-shirt photo shoot and a cake from Giant Eagle. Her family's support made her feel even more excited. Her plan was originally to move to campus, but the pandemic forced UCLA to be online for a year. Surprisingly, this helped her transition from homeschool to college academics. She also booked a major film during this time, Imperfect High, which was the sequel to Perfect High. She traveled to Vancouver alone, quarantined for 2 weeks, and filmed under strict COVID rules. It was scary, lonely, and intense. And I'm just like, wait a minute. I was living in Vancouver during the time when Imperfect High was filmed. I actually was just planning to move out of Vancouver at the time when Nia would have been there, but she says it was scary, lonely, and intense for her, but she crushed it. Her character, Hannah, dealt with anxiety, peer pressure, and drug issues. Sherry Shepard played her mother, and they bonded deeply on and off screen. Sherry even gave her an acting workbook and a handwritten note on their last day, something that Nia treasured. The movie did extremely well. It was another major milestone in her life. One of her proudest moments from this period was writing a children's book. It was called Today I Dance. It mirrors her own early dance experiences and features a little girl who looks just like her on the cover. By the end of the chapter, Nia explains that she was stepping into a new era, one filled with purpose, opportunity, and self-growth. She wasn't just the girl from Dance Moms anymore. She was an actress, an author, an advocate, a college student, a creator, a young woman building a life completely her own. Her journey was evolving, and so was she. Chapter 16 in Nia's book is called College Years, and it follows Nia into her new era of life, which is one shaped not by dance studios, TV cameras, or Abby's voice in her head, but by finding her own power, her identity, and her voice in the real world. It's the most adult and purpose-driven chapter thus far, showing how she evolves from a former child star into a young woman using her platform for something much bigger than just herself. From the moment she turned 18, Nia was excited to vote. Her parents always emphasized civic duty, so voting became almost a family ritual. And speaking of voting, I didn't get Hillary Duff tickets, and we waited in queue, so can we have a vote for some more Hillary Duff shows? Like, what do you mean there's only 4? Such a small tour. Anyways, getting back into the story. Once she was in college, she dove headfirst into voter advocacy. So her first major college experience was through Civic Nation, and it's an organization tied to Michelle Obama. They asked if she wanted to keep participating in her voter programs, and she was ecstatic. It became her first year as an eligible voter, making the work feel personal and empowering. She volunteered everywhere she could: voter registration drives, food drives at Heinz Field, Civic Nation events, and that's where she met Jade Bernard, who became a mentor and taught her how to navigate the political world as a woman of color, how to speak, carry herself, and stay connected with the right people. Nia finally felt like she was using her voice in a way that mattered. Southwest Pennsylvania's young voter turnout surged in 2020, and Nia felt proud knowing she played a real part in that. Her work didn't go unnoticed. More organizations reached out, including I Am a Voter, I Will Vote, and the Democratic National Convention. She interviewed political figures like Senator Ed Markey, Josh Shapiro, and Dr. Anthony Fauci. Soon, she found herself working with White House staff on COVID resources and women's rights issues. Then came her first huge invitation. The First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, invited her to the White House for the holiday celebration. The pandemic meant the event was tiny and highly regulated. Masks, testing, and extremely limited attendance, but Nia didn't care. She wanted to make a statement. She bought her first designer suit, it was Chanel, plus Louboutin heels. She took as many photos as she was allowed, wanting to just savor the moment. She had no idea this visit would spark a years-long relationship with the White House and the DNC. By sophomore year, life was finally easing back into normality. Nia moved into a UCLA dorm because her parents wanted her to experience real college life: roommates, late nights, communal bathrooms, the whole shebang. It terrified her at first. She'd been homeschooled, lived on sets, and never shared a room. But she embraced the challenge. She kept her apartment as a backup, like escape pod, but she wanted the full freshman experience she never got. This part is just like so unrelatable. Like, to be completely honest, I'm glad that she got that experience, but just like to be able to own an apartment in LA and still keep your apartment just empty, but also have a dorm room at UCLA to have the full college experience. Who can relate to that? Nobody. Maybe like the Sprouse twins at NYU, but while she was there, she joined Icarus Contemporary, and it's UCLA's student-led dance group. She rehearsed multiple times a week, performed at campus events, and discovered she loved being on stage again, but for herself this time. And this led to a surprising twist. She actually learned she could choreograph for Icarus. Suddenly, she was exploring a part of dance she'd never tried before, and she fell in love with it. And at this point in the novel, I'm like, has Nia lived like 16 lives? Like, all these different government events and going to university, being on dance moms, being on a soap opera, having a music career. It's crazy how much she's actually done, and that she still managed to like have a year where she went back to real high school and actually managed to go to university while still doing all of that. Like, that's crazy. What kind of life is that? I cannot imagine. This is what dreams are made of. But anyways, we were at the choreography part, and by junior year, she was deeply involved in midterm election advocacy. So we're getting back onto politics, but she traveled to Washington, D.C., she met with the DNC, and she got invited to the White House press room to hear President Biden speak. Then came the moment of a lifetime. She actually met President Joe Biden in person. And not only did she meet Joe Biden in person, but he actually invited her and the other influencers into the Oval Office, which is a place that most government staff never even enter. He showed them awards, gifts, and personal mementos from his decades in politics. He connected with them as regular people, which stunned Nia. Before they left, he said, "Use your platform for good. Any one of you could be president one day." Nia was speechless. Hearing that from the president made her feel seen, powerful, and capable. She also met Dr. Fauci and the Surgeon General, people she had only ever seen through screens during the pandemic. A few months later, she was selected as the only media correspondent to interview Vice President Kamala Harris during a talk about climate change. Harris had researched Nia beforehand and knew about her advocacy work, something that completely stunned her. A year later, she sat at the head table during a reproductive rights roundtable with Harris. When the vice president reached Nia in the greeting line, she said, "It's been a while since I've seen you." Nia was beyond honored. She learned what it meant to have a voice, to speak up, and to use her platform responsibly, especially for young voters often dismissed as uninformed. On Instagram, Nia began Role Model Mondays, highlighting everyday heroes. This eventually led to her own Facebook watch show, Dance with Nia, where she featured dancers with disabilities and did routines with them. She wanted to show dancers stories, not trauma, not pity, but strength and joy. She wanted people to see dancers of all shapes, bodies, and abilities. It became one of her most meaningful projects. Nia began working with major brands, and one of her proudest achievements was paying her own way through UCLA without needing student loans. Her agents kept her consistently working, and she stayed determined to graduate debt-free. She joined Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, just like her mother, and found true sisterhood and belonging among Black women who understood her. UCLA taught her independence, critical thinking, and who she wanted to be outside of dance and fame. In 2024, Nia directed her first ad council campaign, which was an enormous milestone. The focus was on mental health in young adults. She created a series called Capture the Convo, bringing together friends in entertainment to talk about anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and mental well-being. It was meaningful, vulnerable work, the kind of impact she always hoped to make. Nia ends the chapter reflecting on how everything she went through at the ALDC ultimately led her to a path of advocacy, storytelling, public service, empowerment, and leadership. She keeps framed letters from President Biden and multiple notes from Michelle Obama. Vice President Harris even congratulated her on joining AKA. But what matters most to Nia isn't the prestige, it's the impact. She feels she's exactly where she's meant to be, and she knows it's only the beginning. And I've just got to say, personally, I thought that I kept pretty up to date with Nia's life, but I learned so much from this book in terms of her advocacy and government work, and I'm like, wow, she's very, very involved with government to the point that I had no idea. I'm sure that her parents, especially her mom, would be extremely proud of her, and I honestly would not be surprised if Nia heads more down the government lane than down the performing lane, because that's just the kind of vibe that Nia has already given me, but especially after reading this book and seeing just how involved she is. But that was the end of chapter 16, which brings us to the last chapter of the book, which is chapter 17. Chapter 17, which is called Star in Your Own Life, is really just like Nia's final reflection chapter. The moment where she ties together everything she's lived through, everything she's healed from, and everything she's built after Dance Moms. It's both powerful and heartbreaking, and also incredibly inspiring. Nia starts by talking about how grateful she is for her social media following, not just because it's her job now, but because it truly helped her learn how to embrace herself. She remembers feeling like she would never have as big of a platform as the others, and she was wrong. She brings up something Caleb McLaughlin from Stranger Things once said, how even within a fandom, Black cast members tend to have fewer followers. And instantly she recognized the same pattern in the Dance Moms fandom. Despite being the longest running cast member on the entire show, Nia consistently had way lower follower counts than the other girls. She's not bitter about it, but she wants people to understand that this wasn't a coincidence. Nia connects this to a broader conversation about how Black creators often have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. It affects how you view yourself, how you value your accomplishments, and how you move through the world. She explains that social media is designed for comparison, and she had to make a conscious choice to use her platform to tell her own story and not compare it to others. She says her online community makes her feel supported, uplifted, and cheered on, and that strength has carried her through some of her hardest moments. She talks about her natural hair journey too, how Abby used to insult her braids and make her feel ugly, but sharing her natural hair journey online allowed her to reclaim that confidence. Her virtual aunties, as she calls them, and supporters truly became her community. Nia opens up about how much she remembers from Dance Moms and how much she's blocked out. Watching old clips can trigger unwanted memories. Writing this book forced her to relive a lot of deeply painful moments she had spent years trying to forget. She marvels at the little girl she used to be, how strong she was without even realizing it, and also at how cruel some of the adults around her were. She realizes now as an adult what she couldn't fully understand as a child. These people were crossing boundaries and taking out their issues on a kid. She refuses to accept the excuse that it was just a TV show. During the pandemic, Dance Moms blew up again on TikTok. Clips of the show went viral, and a whole new wave of viewers discovered it. But Nia notes something important. People who grew up watching the show now view it differently. Things they used to think were funny are now recognized as racist, inappropriate, or outright disturbing. She acknowledges the show is iconic and magical. She's proud of being part of something that shaped pop culture, but she also asks the hard question, at what price? Nia explains that Abby's cancer diagnosis in 2018 threw her into an emotional spiral. Despite everything Abby had put her through, Nia would never wish cancer on anyone. But leaving the ALDC had been abrupt. She never got closure. So when Abby fell ill, Nia wanted to reach out, not for Abby, but for herself. She didn't want Abby to die without Nia having said the things she needed to say. So Nia asked her mom to coordinate a visit, making it clear they did not want the meeting to be filmed. After silence from Abby's team, they finally got an answer. Abby declined the visit on Nia's birthday. The text Abby sent back was stunning. She blamed Nia's mother, claiming she never saw Mom around, and even took credit for the money in Nia's pockets. It was cruel, dismissive, and invalidating. That message was the final push Nia needed. She closed the chapter forever. She refuses to speak to Abby again, not out of hatred, but because Abby no longer exists in her world. She has ended relationships with people who still associate with Abby because she needed to heal. She didn't even want to include Abby's name in the book, but she felt she needed to do so for the truth to be documented. During the 2020 racial reckoning, former cast members and fans began calling out Abby's racist behavior. Lifetime cut ties with her. Abby issued a public apology, but addressed Cameron and Adriana, completely skipping over Nia. That omission said everything Nia needed to know. Nia still has not received an apology for anything Abby did to her. Nia reflects on how Abby's pyramid system warped everyone's sense of worth, and how even America seems to operate on hierarchies. But she insists that the pyramid was only one woman's opinion. She realized something profound. Being at the bottom gave her space to grow. When you're always on top, you're afraid of losing it. But when you're at the bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. She wants people to understand your worth is not determined by how others rank you. Nia shares the biggest lessons she's taken away from her journey, like people will try to dim your light. Don't let them. You're going to encounter Abbeys in life. People want to tear you down. Keep going anyway. You don't owe anyone proof of your worth. You didn't come this far just to come this far. And success looks different for everyone. She admits people still come up to her and ask, "Who is that really successful girl from the show?" implying they didn't mean her. It hurts, but she's learned to let it go. She acknowledges how hard it can be to thrive in environments where you constantly feel underestimated. She hopes her story encourages others to keep going even when it feels like they have to work twice as hard. Create your own opportunities, choose yourself, and understand you deserve to be there. Nia talks about her spirituality, how she doesn't attend church every Sunday, but deeply believes every blessing in her life came from God. When she was at her lowest, she knows He made a way. She describes how success for her now means being true to herself, honoring her family, keeping God first, and knowing she has a greater purpose. She's done the work emotionally and mentally, and she's built a resume full of accomplishments, a book, an incredible support system, meaningful friendships, and a flourishing career. The chapter ends with her proudly saying she is finally the star in her own life, and she's ready for whatever comes next. After spending this much time walking through Nia's story, page by page, chapter by chapter, it becomes clear that this book isn't just a memoir, it's like a reclamation. It's a young woman taking back the narrative that was shaped for her, rewritten over and over and over for her, and spoken about her long before she was ever allowed to speak for herself. For years, Nia lived under systems designed to rank her, limit her, silence her, and make her feel small. She was the girl placed at the bottom of the pyramid, the one doubted, dismissed, overlooked, and told flat out that she wasn't good enough. And yet every chapter of her life reveals the truth. She refused to stay where someone else put her, because nobody puts baby in a corner. This book is the journey of a child who is underestimated, becoming a woman who owns her voice. It's a story about what happens after the cameras stop rolling, the healing, the identity crisis, the isolation, the rebuilding. It's about learning to set boundaries, to walk away from toxicity, to release the need for closure that would never come, and to finally choose yourself. Nia shows us that growth isn't linear, it's messy, it hurts. It requires unlearning the lies you were taught about your worth. But she also shows us that healing is possible, that therapy matters, that community matters, that your voice matters, especially when you spent years being told it doesn't. And maybe most importantly, she demonstrates that success is not defined by pyramids, rankings, follower counts, or who gets the most screen time. Success is defined by becoming whole again, by honoring your own story, by refusing to let someone else's cruelty dictate your destiny. Throughout advocacy, education, performance, writing, and the impact she's making on others, Nia proves that the real victory isn't fame or recognition, it's freedom. Freedom from the roles she was assigned, freedom from the opinions that were projected onto her, freedom to become who she was meant to be. In the end, Nia Sue didn't just survive Dance Moms, she transcended it, baby. She took every painful moment, every dismissal, every insult, every time she was placed at the bottom, and she turned it into fuel. She turned it into art, into purpose, into a life that she leads on her own terms. So if there's one message this book leaves us with, it's this. You are not where someone ranked you. You are not the worst thing that was said about you. You are not defined by who tried to dim your light. You get to choose who you become. You get to write your story. You get to be the star in your own life. And just like Nia, you didn't come this far just to come this far, bitch. Alright, you guys. Well, this book has been an absolute roller coaster, and to be completely honest, it is 2 o'clock in the morning right now, and I am completely exhausted. I've been pulling like almost all-nighters pretty much every single day this week, reading this entire book, digesting this book, writing the scripts. Normally, when and if I make a 45-minute long video, I take like a full week at least to make it. Like at this point, I have covered 2 entire feature film lengths of video talking about Nia's book. So my brain is absolutely fried at this point, and I've also, that's at the same time that I've been doing all of this Dancing with the Stars coverage for this season. Thank you guys so much for the support on all of these videos. It means the most to me, and it's been a wild ride. Wishing Nia all of the continued success with this book. Congratulations to Nia for becoming a New York Times bestseller. But that is it from me for today's video and for this series. I really hope that you guys all enjoyed it. And let me know your suggestions for other deep dives and other videos that you'd like to see on this channel before we go. And you can also check out a link to purchase Nia's book if you haven't done so in the pinned comment. You will also see a link there to my Patreon. Thank you to the patrons who have been supporting this channel as well. And you can check out another one of my videos over here before you go. And as always, make sure to be weird, be wild, and stay sparkly. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.